The garage smelled of ozone, regret, and the particular scent of solar that suggested someone had been welding at 3 a.m. while drunk on alien whiskey, which, in fairness, Rick had been. The Smith family garage existed in that peculiar state common to mad scientists' workshops across the multiverse, organized chaos that would give Marie Kondo an aneurysm but made perfect sense to its primary inhabitant. Half-finished projects lined the shelves like a museum of abandoned ambitions. The smell was, in its own way, an honest advertisement. Like a poisonous frog's gaudy coloration, it declared, "Here be consequences." Rick hunched over his workbench, a portable welder sparking as he reinforced the portal gun's stabilizer matrix. Behind him, the walls were lined with his usual collection, a dimension-hopping toaster, because toast was a cross-universal constant, a weaponized kazoo, don't ask, and several jars containing things that definitely had thoughts about containment.
So, are you actually going to take us somewhere educational this time, or is educational still code for trauma?
Summer said this from the doorway, phone in hand, not bothering to look up. The screen glowed with the devotion previous generations had reserved for religious texts. Rick didn't look up. The welder sparked.
Education is traumatizing. That's how you know it's working.
Last time you said that, Morty cried. Like, for 3 days.
Morty cries when the Wi-Fi's slow. Kids got the emotional resilience of a soap bubble.
Rick held up the portal gun, examining it with the critical eye of someone who'd seen it fail in 17 dimensions, and wanted to avoid an 18th.
Besides, this time's different. We're going somewhere actually interesting.
Morty appeared behind Summer like anxiety's awkward nephew, tugging at his yellow shirt, a nervous habit that had probably worn the fabric thin in specific therapy-revealing patterns.
"Oh, geez, Rick. You said interesting about the slug dimension, and the screaming forest dimension, and that place where geometry was considered a hate crime."
And you learned something from all of those, didn't you?
"I learned that therapy is not a miracle cure."
Rick stood, gesturing with the portal gun like a conductor, introducing his orchestra to the concept of arson.
I've been tracking signals from dimension Zeta 9. Crystalline probability nodes growing naturally in reality distortions. Pure, concentrated dimensional flux. With the right implementation, I could stabilize portal generation by 40%.
Morty blinked.
"So we're risking our lives for better Wi-Fi."
Before you start your whole, "But what about safety routine?" I've already mapped the dimension. Low hostility index, minimal predator activity, atmosphere's breathable. 20 minutes, in and out.
"You said that about the butt dimension."
The butt dimension was a statistical outlier and should not be counted.
Rick aimed the portal gun at the garage wall, which had long since resigned itself to regular violations of its structural integrity. The power cell hummed with the sound of microwaves contemplating their mortality.
All right, mouth breathers, field trips on.
He pulled the trigger. The portal bloomed open, the familiar emerald swirl that signified either adventure or a cease and desist, depending on one's perspective. Through the opening, a landscape of floating crystal structures, each pulsing with bioluminescent light, suspended in purple-tinted air that looked thick enough to swim through.
Huh, that's actually kind of pretty.
Summer said this while actually gracing the phenomenon with her visual attention.
Pretty usually means poisonous or plotting. Sometimes both. Nature's warning labels.
Rick stepped toward the portal, scanner already out.
Morty, you're on sample duty. Summer, you keep watch for...
The portal flickered. Not the usual fluctuation. This was different. Wrong. Like reality had briefly forgotten its lines and stood there stammering. The emerald light bled purple at the edges, like a bruise spreading across light itself. The familiar hum shifted, dropped an octave, became something that bypassed the ears entirely, and whispered directly into the brainstem, with the voice of something that had learned human language from screaming. Rick froze. His expression cycled through confusion, recognition, and the particular variety of dread known only to scientists who've just realized their experiment is about to educate them.
Uh,
Uh?
Morty's voice went up an octave.
Rick, you don't say You're not allowed to say is what we say, and then you know what to do.
The scanner on Rick's wrist erupted in angry red warnings. His face cycled through expressions like a slot machine landing on Apocalypse.
okay, new plan. Everyone back away from the...
The portal convulsed. It expanded violently, edges whipping out like tentacles made of light and malicious intent. One wrapped around Summer's waist before she could scream, before she could even realize that something was grabbing her with physics that weren't supposed to be grabby. Her phone hit the concrete. The screen shattered. The last notification frozen forever in digital amber. Brad liked your post. The universe, in its infinite irony, had ensured Summer's final earthly interaction was knowing Brad. Brad had noticed her.
Rick,
Summer clawed at the air, at anything.
what the...
The tentacle yanked her forward, into the swirling void. The portal snapped shut like a mouth closing, like a trap springing, like reality itself saying gotcha, and meaning it. Silence. Morty stood frozen, his brain trying to process what his eyes had just seen and failing spectacularly.
Rick, where did she...
Rick was already moving, fingers flying over the portal gun's interface with the manic precision of someone whose entire worldview had just been violated by dimensional mechanics.
Interdimensional interference. That shouldn't be possible.
He pulled up a holographic display showing tangled probability lines that looked like spaghetti drawn by an entity that had never seen spaghetti but had strong opinions about narrative structure.
Something grabbed the tunnel midstream. Something big enough to redirect an active portal connection. Something that knows how portals work.
Can you open it again? Can you get her back?
Rick tried. The portal gun whined, sparked, and produced a sickly yellow glow that lasted approximately 2 seconds before collapsing like a failed souffle. On the second attempt, the gun actually yelped and shut down entirely.
Psychic saturation.
Rick stared at the dead device like it had personally betrayed him.
The dimensional layer we were crossing through is active. There's thought energy bleeding through the barriers between realities. Something in that space doesn't want portals. Something that knows how to stop them.
He looked at Morty, and for once the sarcasm was gone, stripped away like paint in a sandstorm.
What do we do?
Rick's jaw set in that particular way that meant he was about to do something monumentally stupid or monumentally brilliant, and possibly both. He grabbed equipment, power cells, scanners, what looked like a grenade made of crystallized mathematics and spite.
We go get her. Manual insertion. I'll triangulate her signal and punch through the interference.
Rick, you just said something was stopping portals.
Yeah, well, something's about to learn that I don't take no for an answer from physics, authority figures, or cosmic entities with delusions of adequacy.
Rick slammed a fresh power cell into the portal gun. It sparked, resisted like a cat being forced into a bath, then grudgingly accepted its fate.
I've got enough juice for one shot. We're going to ride the wake of Summer's trajectory straight into whatever grabbed her.
And if it takes us somewhere horrible?
Rick looked at him with eyes that had seen too much across too many dimensions to maintain comfortable illusions.
Morty, everywhere is horrible. That's why we've got to find her before it gets worse.
He aimed the portal gun again, coordinates set to trace patterns that showed up on his scanner as purple and screaming. The targeting system, which had been designed to navigate the multiverse with mathematical precision, was now displaying error messages that roughly translated to, "Are you sure about this?" and "You'll need a lawyer."
Hold on to something. This is going to feel like falling through a philosophy textbook written by a sadist with a degree in pain.
He fired. The portal opened, not green, but a roiling mass of purple and black, shot through with lightning that looked almost aware, like electricity that had achieved consciousness and was angry about it. Through it, darkness, metal, rust, the sense of something vast and old and very, very annoyed about maintenance schedules that hadn't been kept in millennia.
Rick, I don't think...
Rick grabbed Morty's arm and jumped. Reality inverted. That's the only way to describe it, though description implies language, and language implies sense, and sense had filed for divorce from this experience and moved to a different universe entirely. Color bled into sound. Time tasted purple. For a moment that lasted a year and a microsecond simultaneously. And beneath it all, he felt something looking, something vast, something that thought in colors that shouldn't exist and dreamed in mathematics that would make Euclid weep. Something that noticed him like a whale might notice a particularly interesting plankton, with curiosity, amusement, and an appetite that transcended mere hunger. Then it ended with the subtlety of a brick through a philosophy department's window. They hit metal grating hard. The air was thick enough to chew, hot, oily, tasting of incense and industrial desperation mixed with what might have been blood, or might have been rust, or might have been the sweat of machinery that had learned to suffer. Above them, impossibly far above, something that might have been a ceiling flickered with dim amber light, suggesting either illumination or a sun that had given up. Morty coughed, looked around at a corridor that stretched forever in both directions, pipes thick as houses coiled overhead like metallic intestines. Cables hung like the nervous system of something that should have died but kept forgetting. In the distance, something was chanting, human voices, thousands of them, repeating words that sounded like apologizing to machinery for existing.
Rick, where are we?
Morty whispered because something about this place demanded whispers. Rick stood slowly, cybernetic eye flickering as it cycled through visual spectrums looking for threats. The portal gun in his hand was smoking, the power cell cracked and leaking probability fluid that hissed where it hit the metal grating.
Somewhere that doesn't believe in OSHA regulations. Somewhere that worships industry and forgot why.
He consulted his scanner, watched the readings, scroll past in alarm red.
Massive psychic background radiation, medieval technology pretending to be advanced, and an ideological framework that makes Scientology look reasonable.
The scanner beeped insistently, showing Summer's trace.
Oh, and Summer's here. Somewhere. Her psychic signature is weird. She's here, but also not here. Like she's in two places at once.
From somewhere in the darkness, a voice shouted in a language that sounded like Latin, and German had a baby, and that baby was raised by someone who thought communication was for the weak. Then came the sound, unmistakable, universal, the same in every dimension, of gunfire. Actually, several gunshots. Actually, what sounded like a lot of gunshots.
And somewhere, it seems, where they shoot first and ask questions never.
Rick checked the portal gun's charge with grim recognition that it was essentially dead until he could find exotic matter to recharge it. Morty looked at his grandfather, at the dying portal gun, at the endless industrial nightmare that surrounded them like a mechanical hell designed by someone who really, really hated happiness.
How are we going to find Summer in this?
Rick's smile was sharp and humorless, the expression of someone who decided that if reality wanted to fight dirty, he'd brought a shovel.
Carefully, Morty. Very, very carefully.
In the distance, something that might have been a bell or might have been a scream echoed through the metal canyons. The chanting grew louder, and somewhere in the darkness, machinery turned, clicked, and began searching for the two entities that didn't belong. Welcome to the Imperium of Man. Welcome to the grim darkness of the far future. Welcome to a universe where there is only war, suffering, and really, really big shoulder pads.
Chapter 2. The Underhive.
If architecture could scream, a hive city would never stop. The narrator feels obliged to mention that what Rick and Morty had landed in was, technically speaking, a masterpiece of engineering. The same way a car crash can be called a masterpiece of physics. The Imperium of Man, though Rick didn't know to call it that yet, had taken the concept of urban planning, looked at it thoughtfully, and decided that up was the only direction that mattered, that building codes were for people who lacked faith, that if you stacked enough suffering vertically, it became holy. They had created, in essence, what would happen if M.C. Escher designed a termite mound, Hieronymus Bosch decorated it, and Franz Kafka wrote the housing regulations. Rick and Morty moved through the darkness like unwanted thoughts trying to find the exit. The air wasn't so much breathable as negotiable, thick with machine exhaust, incense smoke dense enough to qualify as a war crime under 3 different Geneva Conventions, none of which applied here, and the accumulated exhalations of too many people in too little space for too many generations.
Rick, this place smells like a church burned down inside a factory.
Seems it basically is. Like someone looked at industrialization and religion and thought, why choose?
They pressed against walls that were slick with condensation and possibly other things. The metal was warm, fever warm, the kind of warmth that suggested infection rather than comfort. Morty jumped at every sound. Distant chanting that might have been prayer or might have been someone's lengthy complaint to management, rendered in monotone. Closer weeping that suggested the complaint hadn't been well received. Machinery groaning in the particular way machinery groans when it's holding up several trillion tons of poor decisions and would really like to retire, but retirement isn't in its programming. The walls vibrated. Dust that was probably older than some civilizations sifted down from above, adding to the geological layers of neglect.
Rick, this place feels wrong.
Morty's voice was barely a whisper.
That's because it is wrong.
Rick's scanner flickered, pulling data from the ambient environment.
Psychic background radiation is off the charts. Someone built an entire civilization on top of a dimensional weak point.
Can you find Summer?
I'm trying. Her signal's here but scattered. Refracted through about 6 layers of reality, and what I'm pretty sure is organized religion on an industrial scale.
Rick tapped the scanner, which displayed a symbol, a skull with wings and too many mechanical attachments, wrenches arranged in a pattern that suggested either divine blessing or a very aggressive warranty claim.
Great! We're in someone's cathedral factory.
The narrator must note here that hive cities represent one of the Imperium's greatest achievements and greatest horrors simultaneously. They are monuments to human persistence, testaments to our ability to survive in environments that should kill us, proof that we can adapt to anything if we're sufficiently motivated by terror and propaganda. They are also what happens when you take every dystopian novel ever written and decide that instead of warnings, they were instruction manuals. And then you build that civilization vertically for 10,000 years without stopping. They rounded a corner and halted. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, and vast was inadequate. Vast implied you could see the other side. This was more like standing at the edge of an indoor Grand Canyon that had been designed by someone who thought the Grand Canyon was too cheerful and needed more skulls. The chamber had no visible far wall, just darkness that went on long enough to develop its own local dialects. Catwalks crisscrossed the void like a spider's web, designed by a committee with severe communication issues and a fetish for fatal falls. Below, rivers of molten something flowed through channels carved into the floor, the heat making the air ripple and shimmer. And everywhere, were people. They huddled in alcoves carved into walls like human barnacles, clinging to a ship that was actively sinking. They knelt before shrines made of gears and desperation, prayers etched into metal with fingernails because proper tools were a privilege reserved for those who'd earned it. They shuffled along catwalks carrying burdens that were probably metaphorical and definitely literal. Sacks, crates, tools, prayers, frequently all simultaneously. One man walked past carrying a load that was clearly too heavy. He didn't look at them. Didn't look at anything. His eyes were focused on some middle distance between here and death, probably calculating which would come first, and hoping it was the latter.
Jesus Christ!
Wrong franchise, Morty. Also, probably heresy here.
Rick kept to the shadows with the expertise of someone who'd learned that being shot at was optional if you were sufficiently sneaky.
Stay quiet. Don't make eye contact. And if anyone asks if you've accepted their local deity, the answer is yes. And I have the paperwork somewhere, but it's being processed through appropriate channels.
A figure stepped from an alcove ahead. Human, mostly. The parts that weren't human seemed to have been removed rather than added, edited down to the minimum specifications for continued operation. Male, probably, though malnutrition had made gender somewhat academic. His skin was pale as old paper, stretched tight over bones that looked like they'd been carved from recycled structural materials. He wore robes the color of old oil stains, marked with symbols that might have been religious or might have been instructions for his own disassembly. His eyes were wide, feverish, locked onto them with the intensity of someone who'd found meaning in a place that charged interest on meaning.
Strangers?
His voice sounded like a speaker that had given up on fidelity and committed fully to just making sounds.
Outsiders. The Emperor tests us with your presence.
Rick raised both hands in the universal gesture of peace, which was also coincidentally the universal gesture of, please don't shoot, I'm just visiting and didn't mean to offend your local customs.
Hey, friend. Not looking for trouble? Just passing through. We're looking for someone, girl, about this tall red hair, attitude that could strip paint at 20 meters.
The man's face twitched, a tick that suggested his nervous system was filing complaints his brain couldn't process.
Then she is lost. The forges take the lost. The Mechanicus takes all things and makes them pure. Only the Emperor forgives.
Rick's scanner beeped softly. The man's augmetics were primitive but functional, a replacement lung made of brass and faith, cyber-grafted nerves that sparked occasionally, probably an implant in his brain that helped him accept his circumstances without asking uncomfortable questions about alternatives. Before he could formulate a response, a sound echoed through the chamber, a klaxon, deep and ecclesiastical, as if someone had taken a fire alarm and blessed it until it achieved enlightenment, and decided to share that enlightenment with everyone within a 2-mile radius, whether they wanted it or not. The people on the catwalks froze, then scattered like startled cockroaches, disappearing into passages that hadn't been visible before, but had apparently been there all along, waiting for emergencies. The man looked at Rick one more time. Something flickered across his face. Pity, perhaps, or recognition of shared doom, or possibly just gas from the corpse starch rations they probably fed people here.
Run.
Then he melted into shadows with the efficiency of someone who'd had practice.
Rick, what's happening?
Morty's voice was small and getting smaller.
Something bureaucratically violent.
Rick grabbed Morty's arm, pulled him toward an alcove, just as the sound of boots, synchronized heavy, certain of their authority to exist loudly, began echoing from the main passage. They pressed against the wall, hidden behind pipes that leaked steam in a way that suggested the pipes were on a containment strike, but lacked union representation. Through the haze, figures emerged, soldiers in armor that was part riot gear, part religious vestment, part intimidation display. Green and faded brown, pieces of parchment inscribed with handwritten texts all over. Their faces were hidden behind masks that suggested either protection from environmental hazards or the kind of anonymity you wanted when doing work you'd prefer not to be personally associated with. They carried weapons that were part gun, part religious icon, covered in paper seals and prayers, wax seals dangling from chains, purity seals that declared these weapons had been blessed to kill heretics with extreme prejudice and proper documentation. The narrator should note that in the Imperium, even violence requires paperwork, especially violence. They mostly deal in violence, really. At their center walked a woman. She wore armor that gleamed like wet obsidian, form-fitting and functional in the way that armor becomes when designed by people who understand that protection and intimidation are not mutually exclusive. Her chest bore a stylized eye and what seemed like a healthy amount of skulls, which passed as corporate branding taken to terrifying extremes. Her face was pale, sharp, carved from ice by someone who understood both classical sculpture and the intimidation value of good cheekbones. Her eyes, inquisitive as only an inquisitor can have, were winter ice blue and carried the expression of someone who'd seen everything wrong with the universe and had decided that killing it was not only acceptable, but possibly the only moral response. At her hand rested a bolt pistol that looked like it could double as a religious artifact, and probably did. On her other hip, a power sword, currently inactive, but radiating the kind of potential energy that suggested it took its job very seriously. She stopped in the chamber's center, and when she spoke, her voice was amplified by technology that was probably also blessed and definitely intimidating.
Citizens of Hive Ferrum, I am Inquisitor Voss of the Ordo Hereticus, acting under the authority of the God Emperor of mankind. Blessed be his name, eternal be his reign, etc., etc.
She raised a small device, brass and gold, shaped like an eye within flame.
All unregistered persons are required to submit to purity screening. A dimensional taint has been detected in this sector. Cooperation is absolution. Resistance is proof of guilt.
The words hung in the air like a legal document written in threats and backed by orbital bombardment. Morty whispered so quietly it was almost a thought.
Rick, who is that?
Based on context clues, religious secret police with a god complex, and the legal authority to back it up. She's like if the Spanish Inquisition had machine guns.
He adjusted his eye sensor as she raised the brass device.
And she's psychically active. That thing she's holding is detecting anomalies. Probably why she's here. Summer's psychic signature lit up every alarm in this sector like a Christmas tree made of dildos.
The woman, Inquisitor Voss, held up the device and spoke words that Rick's translator rendered as prayer, but his scanner identified as a psychic activation sequence.
The Emperor's light reveals the unclean. His sight pierces deception. His judgment is absolute.
A pulse of golden light washed through the chamber. warm, searching, invasive in the way that airport security was invasive, if airport security had been designed by telepaths with even more authority issues than usual. Expectedly, Morty was ignored. Rick felt it brush against his mind like a customs inspector at a particularly thorough border crossing, checking for contraband thoughts. His cybernetic implants sparked, countering the psychic probe with electronic interference, the mental equivalent of static on a phone line. The golden light flickered around him, confused about what it was reading, decided that was above its pay grade, and moved on to check the next person. But Voss stopped, turned, her gaze oriented directly toward their alcove with the precision of someone whose targeting systems were calibrated by conviction and backed by decades of experience, hunting things that didn't want to be found.
Unregistered psychic signature detected. Non-standard energy pattern. Dimensional origin confirmed. Location: tertiary alcove, northwest quadrant, behind the pipes that are clearly marked as insufficient cover.
The soldiers raised their weapons in perfect synchronization, which was either very good training or very bad autonomy.
Rick,
Yeah, I know.
Rick was already moving, pulling a device from his coat, a small metallic sphere covered in circuits that looked like either cutting-edge technology or something that had been cutting-edge somewhere else, and he'd stolen it during an adventure he'd never told anyone about. He pressed a button, tossed it into the chamber with the casual expertise of someone who'd thrown many things into many chambers, and grabbed Morty.
Run!
The device detonated in electric blue smoke, pure electromagnetic chaos designed to scramble targeting systems, sensor arrays, augmetics, and probably anyone's plans for a quiet afternoon. The smoke billowed out, thick and staticky, turning the chamber into a very angry cloud that tasted like arsenic and poor life choices. Gunfire erupted. Energy bolts tore through the smoke. Bolter fire, Rick's scanner helpfully identified, rockets weaponized into something that could punch through armor. The shots hit walls, pipes, some bystanders. Nothing important to anyone currently shooting. Sparks flew. Metal screamed. Somewhere, a pipe gave up entirely and started venting steam that added to the chaos. Orders were shouted in High Gothic, a language that sounded like Latin if Latin had been designed specifically to sound authoritative, even when singing nurseries. Rick and Morty ran. Their lungs burned with air that tasted of industry and regret, and possibly trace amounts of toxic waste that hadn't been properly disposed of, because proper disposal was expensive, and the Emperor provided. Behind them, pursuit, organized, relentless, efficient in the way that suggested someone had written a manual about pursuit, and everyone had read it and taken notes and practiced until they could pursue heretics in their sleep.
Rick, where are we going?
Morty gasped between breaths that felt more theoretical than actual.
Anywhere that's not here. That's literally my entire plan right now.
Rick followed his scanner more than any sense of direction, which was fortunate because direction here was subjective at best and actively misleading at worst. The passages twisted like intestines, designed by someone who'd failed anatomy but passed abstract art with flying colors. They branched, reconnected, doubled back in ways that suggested the architect had been either very clever or very drunk, or possibly both simultaneously. They passed shrines, makeshift things built into alcoves, offerings of machine parts and prayers, skulls arranged in patterns that suggested either deep religious significance, or someone had a lot of skulls and needed to do something with them. They passed people who stared with empty eyes and then looked away, as if seeing nothing was safer than seeing something. The universal survival strategy of the oppressed, aggressive ignorance as self-defense. They passed servitors. Rick would learn that word later, but for now he just saw people who'd been modified, extensively, invasively, intrusively. bodies that were more machine than flesh, more tool than person, moving with the shambling efficiency of automation, wearing skin as a formality. One was built into the wall, literally built in, like a fixture, like a permanent installation. Its organic components had been reduced to the absolute minimum required for function: a brain, a spine, one arm. The arm wielded a welding torch, endlessly repairing a pipe that had been damaged decades ago and would be damaged again tomorrow. The servitor didn't acknowledge their presence, just worked, trapped in a loop of function without purpose, purpose without choice, existence without the inconvenience of consciousness. Morty stared as they ran past, his face cycling through expressions before settling on horror, seasoned with nausea.
Rick, that was a person.
Yeah, this place seems like that. Need a machine? Find a human. Remove the parts that aren't useful. Bolt the rest to a wall. Instant labor. No salary. Minimal maintenance. Very cost-effective if you don't count the cost of having a conscience.
That's not right. That's...
A nightmare with an HR policy and probably quarterly reviews, yeah. But it's their nightmare, Morty. We're just visiting. Try not to get added to the payroll as a voluntary asset reallocation.
Rick pulled him toward another passage, away from the servitor's eternal mindless labor. They burst into another chamber, smaller, some kind of maintenance hub, where pipes converged from every direction like the universe's worst game of Jenga. The walls were lined with alcoves containing things, mechanical things, dead things, things that existed in the uncomfortable overlap between categories and didn't seem happy about any of them. Morty bent over, hands on knees, trying to remember how lungs worked and why they'd stopped cooperating with the rest of his body's reasonable requests.
Did we lose them?
Rick checked his scanner, watching red dots representing their pursuers moving through the maze with systematic precision, checking every alcove, every passage, every hiding spot with the thoroughness of people who were paid to be thorough and had never been paid to give up.
For now, they're sweeping methodically. Very systematic. Someone's really invested in our capture, which would be flattering if it wasn't fucking terrifying.
He looked around the chamber, scanning.
We need information. A data node. Terminal. Something that can tell us about this place's infrastructure. Where they'd take someone who fell through a dimensional portal. Summer's signal is leading toward the upper levels. They probably moved her to whoever's in charge of weird dimensional shit.
His eye was drawn to movement in one alcove. It contained something definitely mechanical, possibly sentient, and certainly aware of them in a way that suggested it had opinions about their presence, and was probably filing them alphabetically. It was a skull. Human, or it had been human once, before someone had decided that humanity was optional and brass was better. The bone had been polished to a metallic sheen, engraved with circuit patterns. Eye sockets had been replaced with glowing optic lenses that tracked their movement with mechanical precision. It floated in the alcove, suspended by anti-gravity technology that suggested someone had solved that particular physics problem and then used it for interior decorating. Cables dangled from its base like a technological spinal cord that had gotten lost on the way to a body and decided to freelance. And it was looking at them.
Okay. That's new. That's disturbing. That's Hamlet meets RoboCop. Meets someone's very specific nightmare about applied anti-gravitons.
Rick approached slowly. The skull rotated, tracking him with smooth precision. Its jaw didn't move, couldn't move, really, being an ornament to the grill emitter behind it. But a male voice emerged anyway, synthesized, garbled, like someone speaking through water while the water complained about the acoustics.
Unregistered biologicals detected. State your purpose. submit for categorization, or be reported for improper filing. Failure to file properly results in penalties up to and including summary execution and possible posthumous employment.
Rick pulled out a small device from his coat. Looked like a coin, covered in circuits, probably shouldn't exist according to several laws of physics, and definitely at least 3 laws of several jurisdictions they'd passed through.
Or option 3. I hack your control protocols, and we have a conversation instead of you alerting everyone to our position.
He flicked it toward the skull. The device attached magnetically to brass with a satisfying click that suggested magnets took their job very seriously. Blue light pulsed in patterns that suggested either advanced programming or a very targeted seizure. The skull's optics flickered, red to amber to blue, cycling through colors like a traffic light having an identity crisis. The voice changed, still synthesized but more human now, carrying undertones of emotion rather than just processing.
What? Where am I? Who speaks? I was documenting something. The quotas were behind. I had to finish, or they would.
The skull trailed off, optics dimming with something like memory, trying to surface through decades of trauma and forced amnesia. Rick grabbed one of the dangling cables, examined it.
Servo skull, lobotomized human brain, stuffed into a floating religious toaster. Someone didn't meet their productivity goals, so middle management got creative with severance packages.
Morty stared, his face cycling through horror, disgust, and the particular expression people get when they realize that dystopia isn't just a literary genre.
That's horrible.
Welcome to a civilization that turned human resources into a literal term, and then decided that death wasn't a valid excuse for stopping work. The gig economy's final form. You don't even need a body to keep your job.
Rick looked up at the optic.
Hey, you in there? What's your name? Or designation? Or whatever they filed you under before they filed you literally?
Long silence. The skull's optics pulsed uncertainly, as if the question itself was a novel concept, something that hadn't been asked in so long it had become foreign. Then,
I was Elias, scribe of the Administratum, subsector clerk, archive division, records maintenance department, 3rd class. I served the emperor for 30 years. I transcribed sacred texts, prayed, filed reports that no one would ever read, but everyone would need if they were audited. 14 hours a day, every day, for 30 years. Then the quota increased. Production requirements doubled. I fell behind. Failure is sin. Sin requires correction. They removed the flesh that failed and repurposed what remained.
the voice carried weight, decades of service remembered in brass and bitterness.
Listen, Elias. I just rebooted your cognitive functions, bypassed the control protocols someone installed to make sure you only thought approved thoughts. You're free-ish now. Still dead and floating, still probably have to deal with existential horror about your current state. But at least you can think your own thoughts. That's something.
The optic brightened, dimmed, cycled through colors, suggesting confusion.
Free. There is no freedom, only service. The Emperor protects. The Administratum records. The Mechanicus maintains. Service is purpose. Purpose is survival. Survival is all there is.
Yeah, well, now you get to choose whether you believe that or whether you want to help two interdimensional travelers find their friend and maybe stick it to the system that literally killed you and made you work anyway. Your call.
The skull processed this, his optics focused on Rick with something approaching interest, possibly the first interest he'd felt in decades that wasn't about quota fulfillment or proper filing procedures.
You do not know where you are.
5 minutes ago, I was in a garage. Then we fell through a dimensional portal into what appears to be a heavy metal album cover that achieved sentience and decided to call itself a civilization. So no, I don't know. Educate me.
Chapter 3. Exposition and Elevation.
Elias's optics flickered as he accessed what remained of his memories, fragments of a life reduced to filing protocols and mandatory prayer.
This is Hive Moloch, planet Axos, 12 billion souls. I was assigned to Sector 47 Gamma. Records, maintenance. I filed reports, processed prayer requisitions, logged work quotas.
His voice carried the weight of someone describing a life so small it fit in a filing cabinet.
The Mechanicus controls the upper levels, the Forge District. I filed their requisition forms, but never saw their work. Above my clearance, above my station.
Rick was already pulling out a cable, connecting to one of Elias's data ports.
I'm going to use you as a network access point. Pull whatever local data you can reach. Building schematics, power grid, anything that helps us find Summer and get out.
My clearance was very low. I could access maintenance schedules, structural reports, local sector logs.
That's perfect. Nobody bothers to secure low-level maintenance data, and that's where all the useful stuff hides.
Rick's scanner connected through Elias to the local data systems. Not the vast imperial noosphere, just the Hive City's cogitator network. Practical information began flowing. Power conduits, ventilation systems, maintenance access routes, structural integrity reports that were decades out of date but still useful.
Okay, I've got building schematics. Summer's signal is pointing toward the Forge Prime. That's the big cathedral factory at the top of this industrial nightmare. There are maintenance routes that go up through the superstructure. Risky, according to these logs, but risky beats shot.
He pulled more data, watching schematics overlay with thermal readings.
And I'm tracking something else. Massive power draw in the Forge Prime, way beyond normal manufacturing requirements. Someone's running equipment that pulls more energy than the rest of the Hive combined. That's either industrial-scale production, or someone's building something they really don't want anyone knowing about.
Morty watched the holographic display of the Hive's structure, a vertical city that looked like someone had taken architectural brutalism and decided it wasn't quite brutal enough.
How do we get up there?
Carefully, and probably illegally.
Rick disconnected from Elias, started moving.
Come on. The longer we stay in one place, the more likely Voss's forces find us. And I really don't want to get shot today. I've got a quota on getting shot per month, and I'm already over it.
They moved higher out of the underhive, Elias guiding them through passages that grew progressively newer. The walls here showed layers of construction, civilizations built on top of civilizations, each generation building upward and forgetting what was below. The narrator must note here that hive cities are, in essence, archaeological sites that people still live in. Every level is a geological stratum of human history. The bottom levels are ancient, thousands of years old, maybe tens of thousands. The top levels are merely centuries old, and nobody remembers who built the first foundations or why or what. They were trying to escape by building up instead of out. It's very human, really. When you can't solve the problem, just build on top of it and hope the weight doesn't collapse everything. They climbed. The passages grew steeper. What had been corridors became ramps, then ladders, then things that were technically climbable if you were motivated by fear and had low standards for safety equipment. Around level 37, they heard screaming. Not distant, close, personal, the kind that suggested someone was having a very bad day right now. They rounded a corner and found soldiers in green armor dragging a young woman from her home. Her family watched from the doorway, silent because speaking up was suicide, and everyone knew it. The woman was crying, pleading. One soldier held a device that glowed red, psychic detection equipment. And there was Voss. Tall, armored, ice-blue eyes, cold as winter. She looked at the woman with no emotion at all. Just professional assessment.
Kyla Luetten, unsanctioned psyker. The sentence is death.
Please, I didn't choose this. I didn't.
Voss raised her bolt pistol and fired. The woman's head exploded, mass reactive rounds detonating inside flesh, converting a human being into evidence that the system worked. Her body hit the ground. Her family didn't move, didn't react, because reacting would suggest attachment to a heretic, and that was its own kind of guilt. Voss made a notation on a data slate. One more entry in a report that would be filed and never read. She turned, and her eyes found them. Again, like she had a sixth sense for people who didn't belong.
There, terminate them.
Her soldiers raised weapons. Rick grabbed Morty and ran. Behind them, las fire and bullets scorched the air. They plunged into a side passage, feet clanging against metal, lungs burning.
This way.
Elias's voice crackled with urgency, guiding them through turns that probably had names, but now were just left and right and don't stop running. They reached a shaft, maintenance access, ladder leading up into darkness.
Climb! She's hurting us, but that doesn't mean the bullets aren't real.
They climbed. The shaft was never meant for human traffic. Too hot, too steep. Pipes leaked fluids that Rick's scanner labeled as probably toxic and definitely lawsuit-inducing in civilizations that have lawsuits. But they climbed anyway, because the alternative was becoming another notation on Voss's data slate. Morty's hands were shaking as he grabbed each rung. The anxiety was building. Every ladder felt like a choice between climbing toward danger or falling toward death. His palms were sweaty. His grip felt uncertain. He needed something to hold on to besides rusted metal. Needed something solid. Needed grounding. But there was nothing except climb or fall, so he climbed. Behind them, pursuit echoed through the shaft. Methodical, patient. Voss's forces weren't rushing. They were following, maintaining pressure, herding them exactly where Voss wanted them to go. At level 60, the air changed. The random noise of the underhive gave way to rhythm, synchronized machinery, and beneath it, chanting, synthesized voices, broadcasting prayers that made the walls vibrate.
Entering Sanctum Manufactorum and Tech Priest territory.
Rick's scanner was showing elevated readings, not just power consumption, something else. Dimensional instability, psychic resonance. The kind of readings that suggested someone was doing science so inadvisable that calling it science was generous.
Summer's signal is stronger. Whatever they're doing to her, she's at the center of it.
They emerged into a corridor that was actually maintained. Clean floors, working lights, walls marked with proper signage instead of desperate graffiti.
Elias? They can detect us here, right?
Yes, the machine spirits are more attentive in Mechanicus territory. My presence is already anomalous. If they scan directly, they will know you don't belong.
Then we need the routes they don't watch.
There are old passages, condemned, dangerous, but they lead upward.
How dangerous?
17 recorded fatalities in the last week cycle.
So barely dangerous at all. Show me.
Elias guided them through forgotten spaces, storage rooms where equipment waited for repairs that would never come, workshops where projects had been abandoned mid-construction. They stopped before a door covered in warning symbols.
This passage leads upward through the hive's superstructure. It is classified as condemned due to structural instability and thermal exposure.
Perfect.
Elias interfaced with the lock, bypassing security that hadn't been updated in centuries. The door opened, revealing a passage that was less corridor and more industrial accident waiting to happen. Rick checked his scanner.
Oxygen's low, temperatures high. Structural integrity is optimistic at best. We move fast.
This is a terrible idea,
Morty said, his voice small.
Yeah, but summer's on the other side.
They entered. The heat was immediate. The walls radiated energy from the forges above. Steam leaked from pipes. The metal grating underfoot was slick with condensation. Behind them, the door sealed shut. They climbed in silence, conserving breath. Rick's mind was working as they climbed, accessing more data remotely through Elias's wireless connection. The power readings, the dimensional instability, Summer's refracted signal. Someone was building something that required massive energy and a psychic anchor and had been in development for long enough to perfect. 40 years, the data shown. 40 years of unusual work in the Forge Prime. And Voss had been trying to get in for 4 months, systematically building justification. They were all converging on the same point. Rick and Morty because Summer was there, Voss because her investigation pointed there, and whatever Archmagos Ferrum was building was about to come online. Timing was either perfect or perfectly terrible. Rick wasn't sure which. Around level 68, the passage opened into a junction chamber. Through grating above, they could see pipes and cables connecting to systems that pulsed with more than electricity. Ahead, a maintenance hatch marked with the Mechanicus seal. Rick approached it, preparing to override the lock. The hatch opened first. A tech priest stood there, young, minimally augmented, eyes widening in alarm as he registered their presence. Elias moved before the priest could shout. Cables lashed out, interfacing directly with the priest's neural ports. The tech priest convulsed as Elias's consciousness forced its way into his systems, overriding autonomy with direct neural control.
I am holding him. It will not last. Go. Find Summer.
Morty met Elias's glowing optics.
Oh, geez! We're coming back for you!
Rick and Morty stepped through the hatch into the Forge Prime. The corridors here were different, alive. Cables pulsed with energy. Symbols carved into walls glowed with light that hurt to look at directly. The chanting was everywhere, layered voices speaking in mathematical precision. Rick's scanner spiked with readings that suggested someone had been doing very inadvisable things with dimensional barriers. They moved quickly, following Summer's signal like a beacon. The corridor opened into a vast chamber, cathedral vast, the kind of space that made you feel simultaneously insignificant and observed. At its center, suspended in a spinning ring of symbols that rotated through more dimensions than 3, was Summer. Her eyes were closed. Her hair floated around her head as if it was underwater. Around her, reality looked negotiable. Space folded wrong. Geometry argued with itself about which angles were actually possible. Standing before the ring was Archmagos Ferrum, more machine than human. Servo arms sprouting from his back, augmetics covering every surface. His face hidden behind a mask covered in glowing optics that tracked them independently. When he spoke, his voice was layered with harmonics, multiple speakers creating an effect that bypassed ears and went straight for the brainstem.
Ah, the dimensional travelers, you complete the pattern.
He gestured with servo arms that moved in configurations that shouldn't work.
40 years of preparation, and now the door opens. The architect answers. Everything changes.
Rick raised his plasma cutter.
Let her go.
But she is the key, the door. I cannot release her any more than I can stop breathing, though breathing has become optional.
Behind them, alarms began to wail. Elias had bought them time, but time was running out. In the ring above, Summer's eyes opened, and they were the wrong color.
Rick, I can hear it. The voice. It's looking at me.
Ferrum's optics brightened.
The architect shows her truth. Soon the door opens.
The ring spun faster. Just a few levels below, Inquisitor Voss received the alarm she'd engineered. Security breach confirmed, justification achieved. She drew her power sword, blue fire reflecting in winter ice eyes.
Seal all exits. Move.
Chapter 4. The Gateway.
Rick's plasma cutter was designed to cut through reinforced materials, ceramite, hardened steel, the occasional locked door that was being unreasonable about access permissions. It was not designed to threaten a tech priest who'd spent hundreds of years replacing his organic components with machinery that viewed physics as more of a suggestion than a rule. Ferrum looked at the weapon with the detached interest of someone evaluating a curious insect.
A plasma cutter, elegant design, compact power cell, dimensional technology. Unless I'm mistaken, how fascinating. You built this.
Let her go, and maybe I'll give you the blueprints.
Let her go, and the door closes. 40 years of work wasted. The architect's gift refused. The transformation of everything delayed. I cannot accept those outcomes. The mathematics are clear. She remains.
Rick's scanner was analyzing the ring, the energy patterns, the way reality was bending around Summer like light around a black hole.
You're using her as a psychic anchor. Her consciousness is resonating with something on the other side of dimensional barriers. You're using her to punch a hole between realities.
Crude language. She is the key, the frequency, the door itself. Her mind touches the warp without breaking. A talent so rare I have waited centuries for someone like her to arrive. And arrive she did, precisely when the calculations predicted. As the work was completed, the architect is never wrong about timing.
Ferrum's servo arms adjusted controls that floated in holographic space, making minute corrections to systems Rick couldn't fully see.
The warp is thought space, emotion given form, consciousness made manifest. Your granddaughter sees it, touches it without consumption. She is a bridge, and bridges by their nature allow travel in both directions.
In the ring above, Summer's eyes were open now, glowing with colors that shouldn't exist. She was looking at something, through something, seeing layers of reality that normal humans weren't equipped to perceive.
Rick, I can see it now. The patterns, it's like so much. Everything is connected. Everything is part of something bigger. And there's something on the other side. Something vast. It's made of questions, made of change, made of...
Summer, don't describe it. Don't engage with it.
It's showing me what it is. What it could give me. Knowledge, understanding, the ability to see everything, to change everything, to be...
Her voice shifted, taking on harmonics that weren't quite hers.
More!
Rick's scanner spiked. The psychic readings around Summer had just doubled. No, tripled. Something was pushing through the connection, using her voice as a speaker, her mind as a telephone.
Ferrum, what are you actually trying to summon? Because from my readings, it's not friendly. It's something else entirely.
The Omnissiah speaks through many voices, takes many forms. The machine god is evolution, change, the transformation of flesh into something perfected. I asked for guidance for 40 years. I prayed, and I received answers. Specific, practical, real. No other tech priest has received such clear communication. I am blessed, chosen.
You're being played. Whatever's on the other side isn't giving you guidance. It's giving you instructions. It's using you to build a door so it can walk through.
Then I will welcome it. The transformation will be glorious.
The ring spun faster, the symbols blurred into continuous light. Reality around Summer began to tear, not dramatically, but precisely, like someone cutting fabric with surgical tools. Small holes opened in space, bleeding colors that made eyes water and minds ache. Through one of those holes, something looked back. The narrator must pause here to explain what was looking through. In the warp, the immaterium, the sea of souls, the dimension where thoughts have mass and emotions have teeth, there exist entities of tremendous power. 4 major gods, technically, though God is inadequate. They are living concepts, emotions made conscious, aspects of sentient psychology given form and hunger. One of them is the architect of fate, the changer of ways, the great schemer, Tzeentch, the true love child of H.P. Lovecraft and Michael Moorcock. He is change itself, mutation, evolution, knowledge, plots within plots, schemes that span millennia. He is the answer to, what if curiosity was a deity and that deity was absolutely insane? Morty could feel it looking. The weight of attention from something so vast, it made galaxies seem small. He grabbed Rick's arm, his anxiety spiking into territories that would require new terminology to describe.
Rick, we need to get her out of there now.
Working on it. Ferrum, I don't care about your religious revelation or your 40 years of preparation. That ring is using my granddaughter as a battery and a door simultaneously. Shut it down, or I start breaking things until it shuts down accidentally.
You cannot stop what is already in motion. The door opens. The architect arrives. Everything changes.
Rick raised the plasma cutter and fired. The beam hit the ring's control systems, or tried to. The energy refracted through the dimensional distortion around Summer, splitting into new subatomic particles, multiple rays flying off in different directions like light through a prism. One piece hit a wall. Another hit the ceiling. A third disappeared into a fold in space, and presumably hit something in a different dimension entirely.
Fascinating. Your weapon uses principles that interact poorly with warp space. The energy disperses, becomes light, becomes possibility, becomes...
Rick fired again, and again. Each shot refracted, scattered, rendered useless by the dimensional instability.
Okay, plan B.
Rick started pulling out devices from his coat. Grenades, EMP charges, a crystallized mathematics bomb that probably violated several laws of reality just by existing. Ferrum watched with something approaching amusement.
You cannot destroy what you do not understand. The gateway is not merely machinery. It is faith given form, prayer made manifest. You would need to break reality itself to close it now.
Great. I've broken reality before. Usually by accident, but I'm adaptable.
Behind them, the main entrance to the chamber exploded inward, not metaphorically. The massive ceramite doors, designed to withstand orbital bombardment, were blown off their hinges by shaped charges placed with military precision and religious zealotry. Through the smoke came Inquisitor Voss and approximately a dozen soldiers in inquisitorial armor, weapons raised, faith loaded, ready to purge heresy with extreme prejudice and proper documentation. Behind them, 5 figures in black armor that made the regular soldiers look like children playing dress-up. The narrator must explain about the Adeptus Astartes, Space Marines, the Emperor's Angels of Death, 8 feet tall in armor, genetically enhanced super soldiers built from the Emperor's own DNA, each one worth 100 trained soldiers, each one capable of spitting acid, eating memories, surviving in vacuum, fighting for days without rest, and doing it all without feeling fear, because fear had been surgically removed from their psychology. They are, dear reader, the Imperium's poster boys. Literally. They are genetically perfect warriors who know no fear and show no mercy. They are also massive Mary Sues, so perfect they make other super soldiers look weak, so powerful they could solve most problems if the narrative would let them leave their ships more often. But we're not supposed to think about the meta text. We're supposed to think they're cool. And to be fair, they are. In a terrifying child soldier program wrapped in religious zealotry kind of way. These 5 wore black armor marked with silver symbols, Death Watch colors. The Ordo Xenos' personal space marines, each one recruited from different chapters, each one a specialist in killing things that weren't human. They assessed the situation with the cold efficiency of people whose threat evaluation software had been installed at the genetic level. Voss surveyed the chamber, took in the dimensional gateway, the spinning ring, Summer suspended at its center, Ferrum standing before it like a priest at an altar, Rick and Morty caught in the middle like very inconvenient witnesses. Her expression didn't change, just professional evaluation, evidence collected, judgment rendered.
Archmagos Ferrum, by the authority of the God Emperor of mankind and the Holy Inquisition, you are hereby declared excommunicate traitores.
She raised her bolt pistol.
Your work ends now.
Ferrum turned to face her, his many optics cycling through colors as he adjusted to this interruption.
Inquisitor, how convenient. You arrive precisely when the calculations predicted. The architect is never wrong about timing. You are part of the pattern, the final component, the catalyst for transformation.
I am the end of your heresy, nothing more.
You are possibility. You are the choice that makes all other choices meaningful. Stay and witness, or flee and prove you fear truth.
Voss's expression hardened.
I fear nothing. I serve only the Emperor. Fire teams, target the gateway controls. Death Watch, open fire. Lethal force, authorized on the tech priest.
The soldiers begun shooting. Las beams lanced across the chamber, hitting the control systems around the ring. Explosions bloomed, machinery sparked. But the gateway didn't close. If anything, it spun faster. Ferrum laughed, a sound that started human and ended in frequencies that suggested his vocal cords had been replaced by something that didn't care about acoustics.
You cannot stop faith with bullets, cannot destroy belief with force. The door is opening, the architect arrives, everything changes, everything.
The ring blazed with light that made everyone look away. The dimensional tiers widened. Through them, things began to push through. Not physical things, conceptual things, ideas given form, possibilities made flesh, mutations that weren't biological but ontological, changes to what reality meant on a fundamental level. One soldier started screaming as his lasgun transformed in his hands, metal flowing like water, reshaping itself into something that was still a weapon, but wanted to personally prove it to the one holding it. Another soldier's armor began sprouting eyes, actual functioning eyes that blinked and looked around with curiosity and hate simultaneously. The Adeptus Astartes executed most of them. The Death Watch Space Marines held firm, their genetic modifications protecting them from immediate transformation. But even they were being affected. Their armor's machine spirits were acting strange, glitching, displaying error messages. Rick grabbed Morty and pulled him behind a support pillar.
Okay, this is bad. This is very bad. We're standing at ground zero of a dimensional breach, and everything around us is about to get very weird, very fast.
What about Summer?
Working on it.
Rick's scanner was pulling data frantically. The gateway's energy signature, the dimensional frequency, Summer's psychic resonance. He needed to disrupt the connection without killing her. Needed to break the anchor without breaking the anchor. He needed time, equipment, a laboratory, things he didn't have. What he had was a plasma cutter, some grenades, a grandson who was having a panic attack, and a granddaughter who was currently serving as a door for something that thought form was optional. Voss was shouting orders. The Space Marines were advancing toward Ferrum, bolt weapons raised. The tech priest was laughing, his body transforming, metal flowing into flesh, and flesh into crystal and crystal into concepts that didn't have names because naming them would make them real in uncomfortable ways. And in the ring, Summer spoke with a voice that was hers and wasn't.
I can see you, Rick. I can see all of you. Every version, every choice.
Rick's blood went cold.
Summer, that's not you talking. That's it. Using your voice. Don't listen to what it's showing you.
But it's true. I can see it. All the timelines, all the failures.
Her eyes blazed brighter.
And I can see what I could become, what it's offering. Power to protect, knowledge to prevent, the ability to see danger before it arrives, to save everyone, to be...
Controlled by something that thinks manipulation is love.
Rick finished.
Summer, whatever it's showing you, it's curated, selected, designed to make you accept its offer. That's what these things do. They show you truth and call it complete when it's just the parts that serve their agenda.
Above them, Elias's voice crackled through a Vox speaker, weak, failing, burning out from the strain of holding the tech priest.
Rick, I cannot hold much longer, but I can do one thing, one last thing.
Elias.
Cables connecting the ring to the forge's main reactor. I can see them in the new sphere. I can overload them, feedback, cascade failure, destabilize it, give you seconds, maybe minutes.
Rick understood immediately.
Do it. We'll grab Summer in the chaos.
Thank you for the choice, for reminding me that choosing matters more than surviving, more than serving, more than...
The Vox cut out. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every cable connected to the gateway blazed with light. Energy poured through systems that weren't rated for it, burning through insulation, overwhelming safety protocols, turning carefully calibrated machinery into molten failure. The ring stuttered, slowed. The dimensional tears flickered like dying lights. Ferrum screamed, actually screamed, his harmonized voice breaking into pure rage.
No, the calculations, the pattern, you cannot...
The gateway destabilized. Summer fell from the ring's center, the psychic connection severing with an almost audible snap. She dropped toward the chamber floor, 20 meters down, unconscious, powerless. Morty moved without thinking. He ran. Across the chamber, through the chaos, through the last fire and the screaming and the soldiers whose armor was growing extra limbs. He ran toward where Summer was falling. He wasn't fast enough, wasn't strong enough, couldn't reach her, but one of the Space Marines could. Brother Sergeant Cale of the Death Watch caught Summer mid-fall, his enhanced reflexes making the catch look easy when it was anything but. He absorbed the impact, turned, assessed her condition with sensors built into his helmet.
Alive. Warp tainted. Unconscious. Requires screening.
He carried her toward Voss like she weighed nothing, because to him she basically did. Behind them, Ferrum was transforming fully now, his body abandoning the pretense of humanity, flowing into something that was part crystal, part metal, part screaming geometry. The Space Marines were engaging him with bolt weapons that detonated with thunderous authority. Ferrum was dying, or transforming, or ascending. The terminology was unclear and probably heretical to debate. The Space Marines fired until there was nothing left but crystal shards and the lingering sense that something vast had been paying attention and was now looking elsewhere. The gateway closed with a sound like reality sighing in relief. Rick ran toward them.
That's my granddaughter. Give her back.
Voss looked at him, then at Summer, then back at him. Her expression was unreadable.
She is warp-touched.
She's not corrupted. She's resistant. She touched the warp and didn't break. That's not contamination. That's immunity.
Eventually, all who touches chaos falls. It is only a matter of time.
Rick's mind raced, looking for arguments, for leverage, for anything.
She's valuable, unprecedented. A human who can perceive the warp without going insane. That's research gold. That's strategic advantage. Kill her, and you waste potential intelligence about the enemy.
Voss was silent for a moment. She made a decision.
You will all come with us, back to my ship. The girl will be examined, tested. If she shows contamination, she dies. If she shows resistance...
Voss's eyes narrowed. She gestured to her soldiers.
Secure them. Full restraints. Psychic suppression for the girl. Move.
Rick felt restraints snap around his wrists. Blessed ceramite, probably consecrated, definitely uncomfortable. Morty was similarly restrained. Summer was placed on a medici stretcher, unconscious, monitoring equipment attached to track vitals and warp taint simultaneously. They were marched out of the Forge Prime, through corridors filled with tech priests who watched in silence as their Archmagos' work ended in fire and wishing for a mind wipe. They'll most be turned to spare parts by this time tomorrow, by inquisitorial intervention. They boarded a black Death Watch transport shuttle outside, a testament to the idea of bricks, with enough skulls having a low radar profile. Once in orbit, Voss's ship waited, a gothic monstrosity of a vessel, all spikes and prayers and gun batteries that suggested diplomacy was optional. They were unloaded aboard, taken to holding cells deep in the ship's bowels, separated, contained. Rick sat in his cell and immediately started analyzing, scanning, planning. They had Summer. They had leverage. They had questions about dimensional travel and warp resistance that Rick could answer if it bought them time. And Rick needed time. Time to figure out how to escape. Time to analyze Summer's condition. Time to repair the portal gun. In another cell, Morty sat with his head in his hands, thinking. Summer had almost been lost. Elias had sacrificed himself. They were prisoners of religious fascists with the legal authority to execute them on suspicion. His hands were still shaking. The anxiety hadn't left. It never left. It just waited for the next crisis. And in a medical bay, Summer lay unconscious, while tech priests and inquisitorial medici ran tests, took samples, analyzed blood and brain activity and psychic resonance. Her eyes still glowed faintly, even in unconsciousness. The warp had touched her, and she had touched it back.
Chapter 5. Transit and Consumption.
The holding cell was, by Imperium standards, exactly what a holding cell should be. Uncomfortable enough to remind you that you were a prisoner, but functional enough to keep you alive until someone decided whether you were worth keeping. Rick sat on the metal cot, scanner confiscated, coat searched, devices removed. They'd taken everything except his clothes and his cyberware, and he suspected they'd only left the cyberware because removing it without killing him required more effort than they were willing to invest before they'd extracted whatever value he represented. The door opened. 2 guards entered, not the regular soldiers, but ones in heavier armor marked with the inquisitorial seal. Behind them came a tech priest, red robes pristine, face hidden behind a bronze mask covered in sensor arrays.
Rick Sanchez, you will come with us. Cooperation is advised. Resistance will be met with tranquilization and physical restraint.
Rick stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening.
Where are we going?
Evaluation. Documentation. Standard procedures for unauthorized xenotech and augmetic analysis.
The guard's voice was emotionless, the tone of someone reading from a manual. They escorted him through corridors that were less ship interior and more Gothic cathedral that someone had taught to fly. Every surface was decorated with eagles, skulls, and prayers inscribed in languages that predated spaceflight. The crew they passed moved with mechanical efficiency, each person a cog in a machine that didn't care if cogs had opinions. They reached a chamber that looked like a medical bay, and a machine shop had merged and produced offspring neither parent would claim. Examination tables, surgical equipment, devices that looked designed to take things apart and understand how they worked, usually in that order.
Strip. Place all augmetic components in the designated container. Neural implants will be scanned and cataloged.
Rick's stomach went cold.
You're cataloging me. For what? Future reference? Comparison studies? Planning to build more like me?
We catalog everything. The Omnissiah teaches that all knowledge serves. All data has purpose. You are data. You will be processed.
They moved toward him with sedative injectors. Rick considered fighting, considered that fighting would accomplish nothing except getting him tranquilized anyway, possibly with more force than necessary, possibly with permanent damage. He let them inject him. The world blurred at the edges. Consciousness became negotiable. He felt himself being moved, positioned, restrained. Felt scanning equipment moving over him, cataloging, measuring, documenting every modification he'd made to himself over decades of self-enhancement. Felt them taking samples, small pieces, tissue at augmetic interfaces, blood, genetic material. Felt them treating him exactly like what he was to them, a resource to be extracted, studied, and filed for future reference. The last thought before unconsciousness took him completely was, Voss isn't negotiating. She's harvesting, and goods don't negotiate terms. In another chamber, Summer woke to find herself strapped to a medical table. The restraints were thick leather reinforced with metal plates, blessed with prayers, designed to hold individuals experiencing psychic manifestation. The kind of restraints used on psychers before they were loaded onto black ships and sent to Terra. A tech priest stood over her.
You are awake. Good. Consciousness is required for psychic evaluation. We must determine your exact nature, your potential, your utility.
Let me go.
That is not within my authority to grant. You are property of the Inquisition pending classification. If you are a psyker, you will be treated according to standard protocols. If you are warp-touched but not psyker, you will be studied until we understand how you resist corruption. If you are corrupt, you will be terminated.
The narrator must pause here to explain Summer's peculiar, almost absurd, resistance to warp manipulation. Summer's resistance to Tzeentch's warp whispers stemmed from years of algorithmic conditioning. From age 12, she endured 7.2 daily hours of TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, and Snapchat, persuasion engines honed by data scientists to hijack dopamine and maximize engagement. These outclassed Tzeentch's eons-old schemes, real-time A/B testing, billions of manipulations per second versus his subtle promises. By 17, she'd built defenses, pattern recognition for bait, filters against manipulation, antibodies to control tactics. Demonic temptations echoed influencers. Unlimited power like supplement ads, forbidden truth like clickbait, transform like manifestation reels. 21st century teens had accidental warp immunity, mental ad blockers for demonic content. Summer curated exposure with screen time efficiency, hard pass on unlimited power, seen in 47 pyramid scheme pitches. Algorithmic brain rot forged cognitive antibodies against any engagement-maximizing architecture, social media, or chaos god. Same game, different interface. She was disconnected from the electrodes.
You have demonstrated voluntary control over warp perception. This suggests you are not a psyker in the traditional sense. Psykers generate warp energy. You merely perceive it. However, perception alone is valuable. The Astronomicon requires fuel. Souls that can touch the warp without breaking are ideal fuel. You will be administered accordingly upon arrival at Terra.
Summer's blood went cold.
Administered? What does that mean?
It means you will be taken to the Golden Throne. Your soul will sustain the Emperor's light. You should feel honored. Most humans die meaninglessly. Your death will be a service to all humanity. Your suffering will have purpose.
The tech priest said this with the casual efficiency of someone describing a routine medical procedure. She left. Summer lay there, strapped to the table, digesting what she'd just been told with the numb detachment of someone whose worst fears had just been confirmed with bureaucratic efficiency. They were going to kill her, feed her to their corpse god, burn her soul like fuel, and they were calling it an honor. She tested the restraints. They didn't budge. Blessed leather and metal, designed to hold psychers during episodes. She wasn't breaking free through physical force. She opened her inner eye, looked at the warp pressing against reality, saw pathways, possibilities, ways consciousness could flow through dimensions if properly motivated. Maybe there was another way out. Maybe. Morty's cell remained untouched. Nobody came to examine him. Nobody came to question him. Nobody came to explain what was happening. He sat on the metal cot, alone, anxiety building with each hour that passed without information. He'd heard guards talking outside his door, caught fragments of conversation in high Gothic that his translator rendered imperfectly.
The old one, Xenotech, valuable for study.
The girl, Psyker, fuel grade.
The young male, baseline human, no augmetics, no psychic signature.
Servitor conversion.
Awaiting Inquisitor's determination.
Morty's hands were tensing again, clutching at his shirt. The anxiety that had been building since they'd arrived in this universe reached new peaks with each hour of isolation. They were going to turn him into a servitor, one of those lobotomized, half-human machines. Remove everything that made him himself, and turn him into office equipment that used to be a person. Unless they just killed him, which might be better. Which was a thought that made the anxiety worse, because thinking death was better than conversion meant he'd reached levels of terror that were clinically significant. He tried the door. Locked. Obviously locked. Blessed, consecrated, reinforced, locked. He was 17 years old. He'd survived interdimensional adventures, alien invasions, temporal paradoxes, and his grandfather's casual disregard for safety protocols. And he was going to die in a universe that measured human value in tonnage and considered lobotomy a valid career path. His hands kept shaking. There was nothing to hold, nothing to ground him. Just walls and prayers, and the distant hum of a ship carrying him toward a planet where they burned people to keep lights on. He curled up on the cot and tried to remember what home looked like. His room, his bed, his mom's voice calling him for dinner. Normal things, safe things, things that existed in a universe that didn't think suffering was holy. The warp journey lasted 11 days. The narrator feels obliged to note that the journey to Terra through the warp was, by the standards of warp travel, remarkably uneventful. Only 3 demon manifestations, 2 hull breaches, and 1 incident where a servitor started speaking in tongues that weren't in any approved liturgy and had to be blessed with a Crozius until it stopped having opinions. By Imperium standards, this was a short and pleasant cruise. Rick spent most of it unconscious or sedated, waking periodically to find himself back in his cell with new aches, new puncture wounds, new missing pieces. They were cataloging him systematically, tissue samples, blood, genetic material, mapping his augmetics, documenting his modifications, building a complete profile of how his cybernetics integrated with his biology. Summer spent the time strapped to examination tables, undergoing tests that measured her psychic resonance, her warp perception, her resistance to corruption. They were confirming she was fuel grade, suitable for the throne, quantifying exactly how much her soul would burn, how long, how efficiently. The narrator must note that the Imperium is not really very efficient at allocating resources, but they sure took notes. It has had 10,000 years to perfect the systems. Every resource is cataloged. Every asset is evaluated. Every piece of humanity is assessed for maximum utility. On day 12, they translated back into real space. Terra filled the view screens, a planet-sized monument to humanity's inability to stop building upward. Cities stacked on cities, stacked on older cities, all the way down to foundations laid when humans still believed in concepts like enough and restraint. The ship descended through the atmosphere, past orbital defenses that could vaporize continents, past shipping lanes filled with vessels carrying resources from a million worlds, down toward the Imperial Palace. The palace was less a building and more a geographic feature, a mountain range made of gold and marble and prayers, covering an area the size of continents. And at its heart, buried under layers of sanctity and security, the Emperor's throne room. The ship docked at a facility that took dozens of vessels daily. Rick, Summer, and Morty were unloaded with the efficiency of cargo because that's what they were. Cargo. Funds. Assets awaiting hauling. They were brought together for the first time since boarding, reunited in a holding area where prisoners awaited transportation to final destinations. Rick looked at Summer, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, saw the restraints, psychic suppression, heavy blessed chains, the kind used on confirmed psychers. Saw his granddaughter being used like fuel. Summer looked at Rick, saw the bandages, the new puncture wounds, the way he moved like someone who'd been taken apart and put back together slightly wrong. Saw her grandfather being used for parts. Morty looked at both of them and started crying. Quiet tears, exhausted tears, the kind that came when anxiety had burned through every other emotion and left only exhaustion. Voss entered the holding area, flanked by her guards, her expression unchanged from 2 weeks ago. Cold, professional, efficient.
Rick Sanchez, Summer Smith, Morty Smith, you have been processed, evaluated, and assigned final classifications pending inquisitorial review.
She consulted a data slate.
Rick Sanchez, Xenotech augmentation, valuable data, authorized for vivisection study under Mechanicus custody. Transfer scheduled.
She looked at Summer.
Summer Smith, warp-sensitive, non-psyker, resistant to corruption, fuel-grade designation, transport to Golden Throne scheduled.
She looked at Morty.
Morty Smith, baseline human, no augmentation, no psychic potential, minimal utility, servitor conversion, authorized pending resource availability.
She lowered the data slate.
You will be separated, taken to destination, according to classification. The Emperor protects, the Imperium endures, your sacrifice serves humanity.
Rick's mind was racing, looking for angles, for leverage, for anything.
Thus, you're making a mistake. Summer's resistance isn't fuel, it's a template. Study her alive and you could replicate her resistance. Kill her and you waste the knowledge.
We have taken sufficient samples, genetic material, neural tissue. The data is preserved, the resource can be consumed.
And me, vivisection. You're going to kill me for parts when I could help you optimize your entire infrastructure?
You have been scanned, documented, cataloged. Your knowledge is preserved in data form. Your physical form is redundant. The Mechanicus has requested your augmetics for study. The Inquisition has approved the request.
She turned to leave.
Wait! You can't!
Guards moved forward, restraints ready. Rick looked at his grandchildren, saw Summer trying to stay strong, saw Morty crying, saw them both being processed by a system that didn't care about individuals, saw exactly how powerless he was in a civilization that had perfected the art of turning people into products. Voss paused at the door, looked back.
The Imperium does not negotiate with resources. Resources are extracted, processed, consumed. That is their purpose. That is your purpose. Accept it or do not. The outcome is identical.
She left. The guards moved in. And Rick realized, with the cold certainty of someone who'd finally run out of clever plans, that they could very much die here. All three of them. Consumed by the Imperium's machinery, eaten by a civilization that measured everything in dogma and found them valuable only as parts.
Chapter 6. Separation and Systems.
The transport vehicles were different. Summer's was reinforced, blessed, covered in psychic suppression wards that glowed faintly with power that made her inner eye ache even when closed. The restraints weren't just physical. They hummed with energy designed to dampen warp perception, to make consciousness less accessible to psychic influence. Rick and Morty's transport was more utilitarian. Just metal, prayers, and the assumption that baseline humans and tech heretics didn't require the same level of containment as fuel-grade psychers. They'd been separated at the loading dock. No goodbyes, no final words, just efficiency. Resources sorted by type, sent to appropriate processing facilities, managed with the bureaucratic precision of a civilization that had perfected the art of turning people into products. The narrator must note that the Imperium's resource management is genuinely impressive from a logistical standpoint. It requires organization that would make any supply chain manager weep, with professional admiration or existential horror, depending on whether or not they had conscience. Summer watched through the transport's small viewport as Rick and Morty's vehicle pulled away, heading toward the industrial districts where the Mechanicus maintained their facilities. Watched until it disappeared into traffic that flowed with mechanical precision through streets wider than highways, between buildings taller than mountains. She was alone now, just her, the guards, and the certainty that she was being taken somewhere to die. The transport climbed through Terra's vertical geography, up through levels of civilization stacked like geological strata, past the commercial districts where goods from a million worlds were traded, past the administrative sectors where bureaucrats processed paperwork that would never be read, past the military zones where regiments trained for wars they'd fight on planets they'd never heard of, up toward the Imperial Palace. The palace grew larger as they approached, which shouldn't have been possible because it was already larger than anything had a right to be. A structure that covered continents, rose into the atmosphere, generated its own weather patterns. A monument to humanity's inability to recognize when enough had been several millennia ago. The transport entered through gates designed to withstand orbital bombardment, past walls that could shrug off artillery, through checkpoints manned by soldiers whose weapons could vaporize tanks, and whose faith could probably vaporize doubts if properly motivated. And then, standing at an interior checkpoint, Summer saw them, two figures in ornate armor. The narrator must pause to explain about the Sisters of Silence, because they are, in many ways, the Imperium's answer to the question, what if we had Bene Gesserit too? And then someone said, but give them guns and swords. They are blanks, nulls, born without souls, or with anti-souls, or with something that exists in the uncomfortable negative space where consciousness should be. Their presence cancels psychic phenomena, dampens the warp, makes psychers uncomfortable, and demons actively nauseous. They communicate through sign language because their voices would disrupt psychic phenomena just by existing, which is either very inconvenient or very convenient, depending on whether you're trying to have a conversation or trying to stop a demon manifestation. They were tall, armored in black, decorated with symbols that hurt to look at, not because they were bright or aggressive, but because they represented absence, void, the concept of nothing given form. As Summer's transport stopped, one sister made a series of gestures to the guards. The guards nodded, unsealed the transport, and pulled Summer out with efficiency that suggested they were very happy to hand her over to someone else's jurisdiction. The sister who'd signed approached Summer, her armored form radiating that uncomfortable absence. Summer's inner eye, even suppressed by restraints, could feel the wrongness. Like standing next to a hole in reality, like being near something that shouldn't exist, but did anyway out of spite. The sister made more gestures. Her companion, the second sister, responded with her own elaborate signing. The narrator, having omniscient access to languages including ones that aren't spoken, notes that the sisters were having a professional discussion about whether the suppression restraints were sufficient for transport to the preparation facility and whether additional wards were necessary given the subject's unprecedented resistance to warp consumption. One sister was arguing that standard protocols were adequate. The other was pointing out that unprecedented literally meant we don't have precedent and therefore couldn't rely on standard protocols by definition. It was, in essence, two professionals having a reasonable disagreement about workplace safety standards, while one of them was about to be processed as human fuel. The sisters reached consensus. Additional wards were not necessary, but escort would be maintained at enhanced vigilance. Summer was to be treated as high-value fuel grade with anomalous properties requiring observation. She was led from the transport into the palace proper. The corridors here were beyond ornate, gold everywhere. Murals depicting the Emperor's glory in exhaustive detail, the Unification Wars, the Great Crusade, the triumph over enemies who'd probably looked very impressive before being converted into wall decorations. And everywhere, statues. Massive statues of the Primarchs, the Emperor's 20 sons, each one a genetic masterpiece, each one a tragedy. Horus, defaced but still present. Lorgar, his features chipped away. Fulgrim, beautiful and terrible. Magnus, one-eyed, his statue covered in warnings about sorcery. Half of them were traitors. Half had betrayed the Emperor during the heresy. Their statues remained partially defaced because removing them would require acknowledging failure, and the Imperium didn't acknowledge failure. It just built bigger monuments on top of it and hoped nobody noticed. They passed through another checkpoint, and there, standing like golden statues that had achieved consciousness and decided their purpose was intimidation, were the custodian guards. The narrator must explain about the Adeptus Custodes, because they are, dear reader, the Imperium's ultimate warriors. Each one crafted personally by the Emperor before he got nailed to his throne. Each one genetically perfect, individually optimized, unique rather than mass-produced. But they are older. It's complicated. They are to Space Marines what Space Marines are to normal humans. Stronger, faster, better, more expensive, and significantly less likely to have existential crises about whether Daddy loved them enough. Each custodian is supposedly worth 10 Space Marines. Each Space Marine is supposedly worth 100 normal soldiers. This means one custodian should theoretically be worth 1,000 normal soldiers, which is either very impressive or very questionable math, depending on whether you believe marketing materials, written by the same organization that thinks burning people daily is acceptable infrastructure maintenance. They stand guard at the Imperial Palace. They protect the Emperor. They occasionally venture out to kill things that really need killing. Mostly they stand around looking impressive in armor that costs more than most planetary defense budgets. 3 of them stood at the checkpoint, their golden armor catching light from everywhere, their helmets hiding faces that were probably genetically perfect and definitely unconcerned with Summer's existence as anything other than processed fuel. One tilted his head slightly as she passed, tracking her movement with sensors built into armor that probably had better threat assessment capability than most ship computers.
Fuel grade, warp resistant, anomalous properties, designated for Preparation Facility 7 Gamma.
His voice was processed through Vox systems into something that suggested both divine authority and the kind of boredom that came from standing guard for centuries while nothing interesting happened.
The Sisters of Silence are cleared for escort. Proceed.
The sisters signed acknowledgement, a gesture that the narrator translates as roughly, "Obviously we're cleared. We've been doing this for 200 years, but thank you for confirming what we already knew. Very helpful." They continued deeper into the palace. The corridors grew more functional, less ornate. They were descending now, heading down into the palace's foundation, toward the systems that fed the Golden Throne. Summer had expected to be taken to the throne room itself, expected some grand chamber where she'd be dramatically sacrificed while the Emperor watched or didn't watch, or whatever corpse gods did when people burned for them. But that wasn't how it worked. The Golden Throne consumed 1,000 souls daily. 1,000. Every single day. For 10,000 years. That was 365 million souls per year, times 10,000 years. That was 3,650,000,000,000 souls. You didn't process that many people in a throne room. They reached a massive door marked with symbols that Rick's translator would have rendered as Psychic Preparation Facility 7 Gamma, and authorized personnel only, and the Emperor protects through sacrifice. The sisters signed to the guards at the door. The door opened. Beyond was a facility that looked like a medical center and a prayer hall, and a factory floor had merged, and none of them were happy about the arrangement. Hundreds of people, all wearing the same gray robes, all with the same distant, drugged expressions, all waiting in organized lines that led toward pod stations where tech priests and medici guided them into individual pods with mechanical efficiency. This was where psychers came to die, not all at once, not dramatically, just systematically, catalogued, prepared, processed, sent to the throne's feeding systems in batches, their souls extracted and burned to maintain the Astronomican's light. A tech priest approached the sisters, made a gesture of acknowledgement, and consulted a data slate.
Summer's maze, black ties, Warp-resistant. High-efficiency projection. Anomalous properties flagged for observation. Preparation protocol. Standard sedation. Neural suppression. Soul extraction preparation. Estimated apotheosis time. 4 hours. Estimated subless duration. 4.7 hours post-sedation. Above average efficiency.
The tech priest gestured toward a processing station.
Please escort subject to Station 7. We will begin preparation immediately. The Emperor is owed his tithe. We are currently 372 psychers behind daily quota. Your delivery accelerated schedule compliance.
At Station 7, a Medicae waited, a woman whose face showed the exhaustion of someone who'd been doing this job too long and had stopped questioning whether it was right and started just trying to meet quotas.
Name?
Summer Smith, but you already know that. It's on your data slate.
Verbal confirmation required. Bureaucracy. Lie down on the table.
Summer didn't move. The Sisters of Silence flanked her, their presence making her inner eye ache, but she wasn't lying down voluntarily. The Medicae sighed.
They never make it easy. Restraints, please.
The sisters moved with professional efficiency, forcing Summer onto a pod, strapping her down with restraints that were part physical, part psychic suppression, part ceremonial blessing. The Medicae began attaching monitoring equipment, neural interfaces, psychic resonance detectors, soul integrity sensors that measured exactly how much consciousness was present and how efficiently it could be extracted.
The process is simple. We sedate you, suppress your neural activity to baseline, connect you to the psychic extraction systems. Your consciousness is drawn out gradually, approximately 4 hours, in your extraordinary case, during which time your soul is channeled into the throne's feeding circuits and burned to sustain the Astronomicon.
She said this with the casual tone of someone explaining a routine medical procedure.
You won't feel pain. The sedation prevents sensation. You won't be aware. Consciousness fades before extraction completes. It's quite humane, really. Compared the alternative.
Alternatives like not burning people to power a lighthouse?
The Medicae paused, her hands hovering over the sedation injector.
To die away from his light, you silly. Sleep now.
The injector moved towards Summer's neck. Across the city, in a Mechanicus facility that smelled of oil and sanctified metal, Rick and Morty were being processed with different but equally bureaucratic efficiency. The Mechanicus Biological Cathedral was a Martian franchise of sorts, where the tech priests studied xenotech, analyzed non-standard augmentation, and documented deviations from approved human modification protocols. It was research facility, surgical theater, and holy site simultaneously, because the Mechanicus didn't separate science from faith, and treated both with equal reverence and documentation requirements. Rick had been separated from Morty immediately upon arrival. Different classification, different processing requirements, different futures that both ended in disassembly, but through different means. Rick was strapped to a surgical table in a chamber that looked like it had been designed by people who thought surgery should be performed with religious significance and plenty of documentation. Tech priests surrounded him, their mechanical limbs moving with precise choreography, each one holding implements designed for extraction, analysis, and cataloging.
Subject, Rick Sanchez. Xenotech augmentation, neural interface, non-standard cybernetic integration, classification, extreme tech heresy with valuable data potential, processing authorization, vivisection study, full documentation, genetic and cybernetic material preservation,
One tech priest approached with a device that looked like a scanner merged with a drill.
You know, in my universe, we have this thing called anesthesia. Makes surgery way less traumatic. You should look into it.
Anesthesia compromises data accuracy. The Omnissiah teaches that all knowledge serves. Your pain serves knowledge. Therefore, your pain serves the Omnissiah. You should feel honored.
I feel a lot of things. Honored isn't on the list.
The tech priest's multiple mechanical arms moved into position, holding implements that definitely weren't designed with patient comfort in mind.
We begin cranial analysis. Initial penetration in 3, 2.
Alarms wailed through the facility, not the normal operational alarms. These were different, urgent, the kind of alarms that suggested something was happening at a higher priority than routine vivisection. The tech priests paused, their mechanical limbs freezing mid-motion. They exchanged bursts of binary cant, machine language too fast for comprehension, too boring for translation. In short, Summer had been seriously love-bombing Tzeentch, and something had been catfished out of the warp and into their basement, right now. One of tech priests turned back to Rick.
Emergency protocol activated. All non-critical operations suspended. Mechanicus assets required. Demonic manifestation suspected. Your processing is delayed pending emergency resolution.
They left. Actually left. Walked out of the surgical theater and sealed the door, leaving Rick strapped to the table, conscious restrained, but uncut and still possessing all his implants. Rick waited exactly 30 seconds to make sure they weren't coming back, then started working the restraints. The Mechanicus made good restraints, blessed, reinforced. They hadn't accounted for Rick being Rick, stubborn, experienced, and very, very motivated by spite. The restraints were mechanical. Mechanical meant moving parts. Moving parts meant failure points. Rick had spent 60 years finding failure points in things that weren't supposed to have them. It took 3 minutes and cost him significant skin from his wrists, but he got his left hand free, then his right. Then he could reach the other restraints. He stood, swaying slightly, checking himself for damage. They hadn't actually cut him yet, hadn't removed anything. He was intact. He checked the room. His equipment was there. Coat, scanner, portal gun, stored on a shelf labeled Xenotech pending analysis. Because the Mechanicus wanted to study everything, and they'd been so confident in their restraints that they'd kept everything in the same room. Rick grabbed his coat, checked his scanner, still functional, and examined the portal gun. Still dead, still depleted. The warp crystal power cell was cracked, leaking dimensional energy, basically useless in its current state. He needed to repair it, needed exotic matter, needed... His scanner beeped. It was detecting massive psychic energy, not just ambient warp presence, but concentrated focused power, broadcasting on every psychic frequency. The Golden Throne, the Emperor, burning souls to maintain the Astronomicon. Power output that was measurable, quantifiable, theoretically harvestable if you had the right equipment, and a lot of contempt for the known laws of physics. Rick had both. He started examining the room's systems, looking for power conduits, looking for anything he could use to jury-rig a recharge system for the portal gun. The door burst open. Rick grabbed the plasma cutter from his coat, raised it, prepared to fight his way out with whatever functionality it still had. Morty stumbled through the door, breathing hard, eyes wide, hands shaking.
Rick! Oh man, Rick, I thought I was in this room and they were going to. But then alarms and everyone left and the door wasn't locked properly and I just ran. And I found you and...
Morty, breathe. You're okay. You escaped. How did you escape?
I don't know. They left me in a holding cell, and the door wasn't locked right, and I just ran. I've been running through corridors for 20 minutes. Found you by following the signs that said biological analysis, because that sounded like where they'd take you.
Rick stared at his grandson, saw the anxiety, the terror, the absolute panic that had somehow resulted in successful escape.
Okay. That's actually impressive. Accidental competence, but I'll take it. We need to move. The Mechanicus will realize we're missing eventually. We need to get somewhere we can repair the portal gun and get the hell out of this universe.
What about Summer?
Rick's expression darkened.
They took her to the Imperial Palace, to the Golden Throne. They're going to...
He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say it out loud because saying it made it real.
We have to save her.
We can't. Not yet. We don't have weapons. Don't have power. The portal gun is dead. We go there now. We just get captured again and processed again. And next time, they won't leave us alone in rooms with bad locks.
Rick was already working, pulling components from his coat, examining the portal gun's damaged power cell.
But I can fix this. The Emperor is broadcasting psychic energy on every frequency. It's power. Raw, concentrated psychic power. With the right configuration, I can use it to charge the portal gun. Then we portal into the palace, grab Summer, portal home. But I need time. I need equipment. I need...
Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Multiple footsteps. Mechanical, synchronized. The Mechanicus were starting to manage the situation below. The demon Summer had ghosted, vanished from being able to date on the material plane for 1,000 years.
We need to move. Now.
Rick grabbed his equipment, shoved it into his coat, and ran for the door. Morty followed, his hands still shaking, his anxiety at levels that required new classification. They plunged into the corridor, took a random turn, found a service passage, kept running. Behind them, the Mechanicus forces began searching, systematically, efficiently, with the certainty of people who knew every corridor, every passage, every hiding place in their own facility. Rick and Morty ran anyway. Right now, they were running toward the Imperial Palace, toward the Golden Throne, toward Summer, toward a rescue that would either save her or get them all killed in the attempt. Rick's hands were working as they ran, adjusting components, reconfiguring the portal gun's power systems to accept psychic energy input, building a conversion interface from spare parts and desperate ingenuity. They just needed to get close enough to the throne, close enough to that massive psychic broadcast, close enough to harvest power from a god who'd been eating people for 10,000 years, close enough to portal in, grab Summer, and portal out before the Imperium decided they were done tolerating this shit. Morty ran beside him, hands shaking, breath ragged, anxiety maxed but still moving, because Summer was his sister, and you didn't abandon family, even when family was being processed as human fuel by a civilization that thought that was normal. They emerged from the Mechanicus facility into Terra's evening, though evening was theoretical on a planet where light pollution was so intense that darkness was more historical memory than current reality. The Imperial Palace loomed ahead, massive, golden, impossible to miss and equally impossible to assault. Rick checked his scanner. The psychic readings were off the charts. The throne was blazing, and somewhere in that massive structure, Summer was being prepared for sacrifice.
Come on, Morty. We've got a granddaughter to save and a corpse god to rob. Let's go be heroes or die trying.
Can we maybe aim for heroes?
We'll see how it goes.
They ran toward the palace, two tiny figures against a monument to imperial authority, armed with nothing but a depleted portal gun, a scanner, and the absolute certainty that the Imperium was about to learn that sometimes resources fight back.
Chapter 7. The Data Heist and Divine Consultation.
The view from the Mechanicus facility's exit was, in a word, overwhelming. Terra didn't look like a planet from ground level. It looked like what happened when you took every medieval city that ever existed, stacked them vertically for 40,000 years, and forgot to hire urban planners because urban planning was for people who believed in concepts like zoning laws and structural limitations. And everywhere, people walked. Not drove, not flew, walked. Billions of people moving through passages that had been paths 10,000 years ago and were now effectively canyons between architectural monuments to humanity's refusal to accept that enough was a valid concept. The narrator must explain that Terra is not like other science fiction cities. There are no flying cars, no convenient transit systems, no Blade Runner spinners or Fifth Element taxi drones. Terra is old, 40,000 years of continuous habitation old. It's a medieval pilgrimage city that happens to have spaceships. Most technology is reserved for war, industry, or maintaining the infrastructure that keeps trillions alive. Personal vehicles, that's for people with status, military authorization, or very good reasons. Everyone else walks, or takes trains that run on schedules determined by prayer and mechanical maintenance, or climbs the millions of elevators connecting Terra's vertical geography. Rick and Morty stood at the facility's entrance, looking at the enormity of it all.
Rick, the palace is enormous. How long will it take to walk there?
According to these schematics, I'm currently downloading from Terra's infrastructure network. Because yes, I'm stealing all their data while we walk. The closest palace entrance is approximately 12 kilometers from here. At average human walking speed, 2.5 hours. We don't have 2.5 hours.
Rick was working as he talked, his scanner pulling information from every network it could reach. Terra's noosphere was vast, distributed, and surprisingly accessible if you knew where to look, and had absolutely zero respect for access permissions. Building schematics, power grid layouts, security rotations, traffic patterns. The complete architectural history of the Imperial Palace, dating back to when it was just a warlord's fortress before the Emperor decided to make it the center of everything.
But they have transit systems. Trains running on blessed rails maintained by tech priests who take schedule adherence very seriously. We catch the right train. We cut travel time to 40 minutes. Then we walk the last kilometer because the trains don't go directly to the palace. That would be too convenient. And this civilization doesn't believe in convenience.
Rick was also pulling other data. Medical databases showing current psyker processing locations. Summer's designation, fuel grade, Facility 7 Gamma, scheduled for extraction in approximately 90 minutes. Genetic archives. The Emperor's profile was there, fragmentary, heavily restricted, but present. The Custodian Guard's specs, Space Marine gene seed templates. The complete genetic legacy of a civilization that had been built on one man's DNA and had spent 10 millennia managing the inheritance. Technical specifications for the Golden Throne. Maintenance logs going back centuries. The thing was dying. Not quickly, but measurably. Efficiency degrading year by year. Power consumption increasing. Sacrifice rates climbing to compensate for system failures that nobody understood well enough to fix.
Also, I'm downloading their entire technical database because they have prayers instead of information security. And I'm going to read it all on the train, like a normal person, stealing cosmic-scale classified information.
Rick, can we please just focus on saving Summer?
I am focused. I'm multitasking. I'm saving summer and committing the galaxy's most devastating data theft simultaneously. It's called efficiency, Morty.
They started walking, joined the flow of people moving through Terra's streets toward the palace. Pilgrims, workers, citizens, all moving with the resigned determination of people who walked everywhere because alternatives weren't available. The narrator notes that walking through Terra was like walking through history. Every building had been there for centuries. Every street had seen generations. The stones under their feet had been walked on by billions before them. It was simultaneously humbling and claustrophobic, the weight of ages pressing down, the sense that individual lives mattered very little in the accumulation of centuries. Rick kept scanning, kept downloading, kept absorbing data at rates that would give normal humans information overload and migraines.
Okay, I'm reading their genetic databases now. The Emperor's DNA is fascinating. It's human, definitely human baseline, but optimized, like someone went through the genome and debugged it. Fixed genetic disorders, optimized protein folding, enhanced cellular repair mechanisms. He's not a mutant. He's what humans would be if we'd had a very talented genetic engineer and no ethics board.
They passed through a market where people sold things. Food, probably. Tools, maybe. The scanner identified most items as technically edible and probably won't kill you immediately, which was apparently the imperial standard for consumer goods.
And his psychic abilities aren't genetic exactly. Or rather, they're genetic but expressed through structures that normal humans don't have. Extra neural pathways. Specialized brain regions. It's like he was given the ultimate hardware for psychic powers and then developed the software through 30,000 years of training.
They reached a transit station, massive, ancient. Rick checked the schedule, displayed in high Gothic on boards that looked like they'd been there since before the Imperium existed, and probably had.
Train to Palace District leaves in 4 minutes. We board. We ride. We commit minor transit fraud because I'm not paying and they can't stop me.
They boarded with a crowd of pilgrims. The train was exactly what you'd expect from a civilization that treated everything as a religious experience. Functional but decorated with prayers, efficient but blessed, clean but covered in reminders that the Emperor was watching and judging your adherence to schedule. Rick sat, pulled out his scanner, continued reading.
The throne specifications are insane. It's Dark Age technology, pre-imperial, built by people who understood sciences they've forgotten. Maintained by people who pray to it because they don't understand how it works. And it's failing. They're burning 1,000 psychers daily to compensate for the fact that their infrastructure is dying, and nobody knows how to fix it.
Morty sat next to him, hands gripping the seat, anxiety operating at baseline, which was still clinically significant but manageable.
Can you fix it?
Probably. I'd need access, tools, and about 6 hours. But yeah, the core problems are obvious. Power routing is inefficient. They're using 10,000-year-old conduits that have degraded. The psychic amplification matrices are misaligned, probably from millennia of micro-adjustments that never got calibrated properly. The soul extraction interface is running legacy code that hasn't been optimized since installation.
Rick was reading technical specifications like normal people read gossip magazines.
It's the ultimate technical debt. 10,000 years of, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Applied to something that's definitely broke.
So you're going to tell them how to fix it?
I'm going to tell the Emperor. Directly. Because he's the only one who might actually listen. The tech priests think maintenance is prayer. The administratum thinks efficiency is heresy. But him? He's been sitting on that throne for 10,000 years, dying. He probably knows they're failing. He just can't do anything about it because he's too busy being a battery.
The train moved through Terra with the steady reliability of infrastructure that had been blessed so many times it was afraid to break. Through tunnels carved through mountains of architecture, past stations where millions boarded and departed, through the accumulated history of humanity's absolute refusal to build horizontally when vertically was an option. Rick kept reading. The data was overwhelming, petabytes of information about imperial infrastructure, genetic engineering, psychic phenomena, warp space physics. He was absorbing it all, processing it, building understanding of an entire civilization through its technical documentation.
You know what's really fucked up? They understand more of their technology than they let know. The Mechanicus kind of gets how things work. They just call it prayer and mysticism, because that's how they maintain control. Knowledge is power, and they've monopolized knowledge by making it sacred. It's brilliant and terrible.
He pulled up a file marked Horus Heresy Genetic Analysis.
And here's the really interesting part. The Emperor had 20 sons, the Primarchs, genetic sons, built from his own DNA, each one designed for specific roles. And half of them turned traitor. Half. That's not bad luck. That's systemic design failure. You don't get 50% betrayal rate without something fundamentally wrong with your parenting.
Rick, maybe don't insult the corpse god's parenting before we meet him.
Honestly, he probably knows. He's had 10,000 years to think about where he went wrong. And I'm not even saying what we're all thinking. The heresy looks like an inside job. Maybe too well engineered for the Imperium. I give you that.
The train arrived at a gate station. They departed with crowds of pilgrims, all moving toward the same destination with the resigned determination of people walking toward prayer, work, or both simultaneously. The Imperial Palace loomed ahead. Less a building and more a geographic feature. A mountain range made of gold and marble that covered approximately 1/3 of the continent and rose until the upper levels had their own weather systems.
Okay. According to the schematics I stole, summer's in Facility 7 Gamma. That's in the palace foundation, 3 kilometers down, connected to the throne's psychic infrastructure. We need to get down there. Fast.
They approached the palace's outer walls. Guards stood at gates, checking pilgrims for weapons, mutation, obvious heresy. Rick and Morty joined the queue.
Let me do the talking. We're pilgrims, faithful citizens, here to pray at the holiest site in the Imperium. We are not interdimensional criminals planning to rescue a family member from active processing. Got it?
Got it.
They reached the checkpoint. A guard, armored, armed, bored with the particular boredom that came from checking thousands of pilgrims daily, gestured them forward.
Purpose of visit?
Pilgrimage, seeking the Emperor's blessing. Standard devotional observation.
The guard scanned them with a device that checked for weapons, augmentation, psychic presence. Rick's cyberware lit up the scanner like a Christmas tree.
Augmentation detected. Non-standard. Origin?
Medical. Neural implants for cognitive enhancement. Fully blessed and sanctioned by...
Rick made up a tech priest name that sounded plausible.
Magos Archimedes of Forge World Computron. I have documentation.
He pulled out a data slate showing forged authorization that he'd created while walking. The guard looked at it, looked at Rick, made a decision.
Approved, but don't touch anything.
Don't deviate from designated pilgrimage routes. Don't attempt to access restricted areas. Violation results in immediate execution.
Understood. We'll be very respectful and rule-abiding.
They entered, cutting through the lines of pilgrims, some of which had started their travel decades ago, others born in the way. None protested. Rick was still scanning, still downloading data, still building a complete map of the palace's structure.
We need to go down. Maintenance access. The preparation facilities are in the foundation. We follow these passages, find a service elevator, descend 3 kilometers, and then portal directly into Summer's facility. Simple.
They moved through the palace with the confidence of people who absolutely belonged there and had documentation proving it that was only 90% forged. Servo skulls floating through air, monitoring everyone. Past pilgrims crying as they witnessed the glory of architecture that cost more than their homeworlds. Rick found a service passage, marked for maintenance personnel, monitored but not heavily guarded, because who would infiltrate by going down into the infrastructure? Rick would. Rick infiltrated weird. They descended through levels that grew progressively less ornate and more functional. The gold gave way to metal. The prayers gave way to technical specifications. They were entering the machinery, the systems, the foundation where the Golden Throne's support infrastructure connected to the preparation facilities. Rick checked his scanner. Summer's signal was strong now. Close. Facility 7 Gamma was maybe 800 meters away. He also checked the throne's status. The psychic broadcast was measurable, quantifiable, overwhelming. Power on every frequency, enough to charge the portal gun and have power left over for anything Rick wanted to do.
Okay, we're close. I need to charge the portal gun before we move. There's a psychic conduit right here, one of the major power lines feeding the throne. I tap it, build a converter, harvest power, and we're ready.
Rick found an access panel near a stasis pod, marked with the insignia of the Alpha Legion. Opened it with tools that the Mechanicus would probably call heretical, but Rick called everyday kit. Behind it, cables thick as a leg, carrying energy that was part electrical and part psychic. He started building a converter made from spare parts, warp crystal fragments, and engineering that violated several laws of thermodynamics. The converter connected to the conduit, started harvesting psychic energy, filtering it, converting it to usable power. The portal gun power cell began charging. Clean energy. Stable. No warp contamination. Just pure psychic power stripped of the demon-attracting frequencies and converted into something it could use. Morty watched, his hands starting to shake again as the reality of what they were about to do set in.
Rick, after we get Summer, we're going home, right? We're not staying to have lengthy conversations with cosmic entities?
We're going home.
The portal gun hit full charge. Rick disconnected the converter, checked that everything was functional, triple-checked coordinates for Summer's facility.
Okay, ready. We portal into Facility 7 Gamma. You grab Summer. I don't care if she's strapped down, sedated, actively being processed. You grab her and you hold on. I'll handle everything else. Deal?
Deal!
Rick aimed the portal gun at empty air, calculated coordinates, checked one more time because portaling into walls was embarrassing and usually fatal.
Let's go commit some felonies.
He fired.
Chapter 8 Domestic Disasters.
The portal bloomed open in the middle of psychic preparation facility, 7 Gamma with all the subtlety of a dimension saying, "Fuck your security protocols." Green light, stable, precise, completely unauthorized and extremely heretical by approximately 17 different imperial legal standards. Rick and Morty stepped through into a facility that was currently having a very routine day, right up until it stopped being routine. The Medicaid was holding the sedation injector approximately 2 centimeters from Summer's neck. The Sisters of Silence were standing nearby, ensuring compliance through their mere presence. Hundreds of fuel-grade psychers were shuffling through processing stations with drugged compliance. Everything was according to schedule. Everything was efficient. Everything was...
Morty! Summer! Now!
The Medici stared. The sisters were far away but moved with professional efficiency, weapons rising, training overriding surprise. Morty ran to Summer's table. His hands were shaking. They'd been shaking since they arrived in this universe and showed no signs of stopping. But shaking hands could still work restraints. The restraints were blessed ceramite, mechanical, sophisticated. But Morty had 17 years of experience manipulating small mechanisms while his hands shook. It was his accidental superpower, his anxiety-given talent. Click. First restraint. The sisters were advancing. Silent, professional, very displeased about the dimensional crimes occurring in their presence. Rick fired the plasma cutter at the nearest sister. The beam hit her armor, didn't penetrate, but created a light show that was very distracting and bought approximately 3 seconds. Click. Second restraint. The other sister was signing rapidly to security. Dimensional breach, resource extraction in progress, require immediate assistance. Also, this is absolutely going in our annual report about inadequate countermeasures. Click. Third restraint.
Morty! Faster!
I'm trying. These restraints have like 8 locking mechanisms.
Click. Fourth restraint. Summer's arm was free. She was barely conscious, sedated, but aware enough to help with the remaining restraints from the inside. Rick backed toward them, checking the portal gun's charge. Still full. Enough for multiple jumps. Enough for what he was about to do.
Change of plans. We're not going straight home.
Rick, no!
We're portaling to the Sanctum Imperialis, the Golden Throne Room. I need to see it. Need to talk to the Emperor. Need to...
You need to get us home before we die.
We will. Right after I have a quick conversation with a 10,000-year-old corpse god about his terrible infrastructure management. It'll take 5 minutes.
Click. Fifth restraint. Summer was almost free. The sisters were 10 meters away. 5 meters. Close enough that their blank presence made Rick's neural implants ache and Summer's inner eye feel like it was being compressed, like the flow of time in an action scene when the plot requires. Click. Final restraint. Summer was free. Morty grabbed her, pulled her from the table. She couldn't stand properly. Sedation was still in her system. But she could hold onto Morty while he held onto her. Rick aimed the portal gun at the air and fired. The portal opened downward. Through it, gold, machinery, the overwhelming sense of something vast and suffering.
Everyone through!
Rick grabbed Morty and Summer and jumped. They fell through the portal, through blessed air, through security protocols having collective nervous breakdowns, through multiple layers of, "You are absolutely not authorized to be here." They landed hard on a maintenance catwalk in a chamber that defied description through sheer scale. The Sanctum Imperialis, the Golden Throne Room. The narrator must attempt to describe this space, though language fails and metaphor collapses under the weight of trying to convey something that was less room and more the architectural manifestation of desperation given form. Imagine a cathedral. Scale it up until it generated its own climate region. Cover everything in gold because the budget was yes, and subtlety was for civilizations that didn't have corpse gods to impress. Add machinery, systems that predated the Imperium, maintained for 10,000 years by people who thought maintenance was a variety of incense. Cables thick as buildings, systems pulsing with energy that was part electricity, part psychic power, part the accumulated suffering of trillions. At the center, the golden throne itself, a mountain of gold and machinery and life support systems that had forgotten how to let go. A machine built by people who understood principles this humans had lost, modified for 10 millennia by people who prayed to it because they'd forgotten how it actually worked, and connected to it, trapped by it, sustained by it, dying on it. The emperor of mankind. He was barely visible through the machinery. A withered form that had once been human and had spent 10,000 years transitioning away from that classification. Desiccated, suffering, held at the edge of death by systems that refused to acknowledge when enough was enough. But his psychic presence was overwhelming. Even Rick, not psychically sensitive, protected by neural implants, could feel it. Like standing next to a star, like being near something so vast that normal concepts of size became meaningless. Summer opened her inner eye, couldn't help it, the sedation had weakened her filters, and gasped.
Oh God. Rick, he's so tired. He's been holding the door closed for 10,000 years and he doesn't know how to stop.
Rick was already scanning. His equipment was pulling data, genetic markers, psychic signatures, energy output, system specifications, everything.
Okay. Wow. This is simultaneously the most impressive and most fucked up thing I've seen. And I've seen Cronenberg dimensions.
He was analyzing the throne's systems in real time, comparing them to the technical specifications he'd stolen.
The core problem is efficiency. This thing was probably 20% efficient when built. It's down to maybe 2% now. 10,000 years of degradation, misalignment, and accumulated modifications by people who didn't understand the underlying principles. They're burning 1,000 souls daily to compensate for the fact that their infrastructure is dying.
Morty was holding Summer, trying to keep her upright while she stared at something he couldn't see.
Rick, can we please just go home?
In a minute, I need to...
Footsteps, multiple, heavy, the distinctive sound of power armor moving with purpose. Custodian guards entered the chamber, 6 of them, golden armor gleaming, guardian spears raised, each one a genetic masterpiece worth 1,000 normal soldiers, or possibly just very expensive lawn ornament, depending on your perspective.
By the authority of the Emperor, you are commanded to surrender.
The custodians leveled their weapons with the professional certainty of people who'd spent centuries guarding this chamber and had been expecting unauthorized access. The custodians did not move. This requires some explanation. Each Adeptus Custodes is worth 100 Adeptus Astartes. Since a single space marine is supposedly worth 1,000 normal soldiers, this means one custodian should be capable of conquering entire planetary systems, armed with nothing but a spear and way less daddy issues. And if you are into numbers, digest it. Those numbers just got retconned. 3 of them stood in a semicircle around Rick, Morty, and Summer, weapons ready, perfectly positioned to strike from multiple angles simultaneously. They were, by all accounts, capable of ending this situation in approximately 3 nanoseconds. They did not, because something more interesting than violence was happening, and even custodians occasionally appreciated variety. Rick raised his hands, universal gesture of, "Please don't shoot, I'm just committing minor dimensional crimes."
Before you execute us for heresy, can I just point out that your boss's infrastructure is failing? The throne's power conversion is terrible. The psychic routing is inefficient. I can help. I can make it better. I can reduce the sacrifice rate.
The custodian's helmet tilted slightly.
You presume to understand the sacred systems? To improve upon the Emperor's design?
It's not his design. It's Dark Age tech that he's been using. And yeah, I understand it. Your power conduits are degraded. Your amplification matrices are misaligned. Your soul extraction interface is running code that hasn't been updated since installation. These are fixable problems.
Rick pulled up holographic schematics from his scanner.
Look, here. Power routing efficiency. You're losing 40% of the energy to resistance and heat. Realign these conduits, replace the most degraded sections, and you cut losses by half. That's more than 200 fewer souls per day, just from fixing the power grid.
The custodians didn't lower their weapons, but they didn't fire either.
The psychic amplification matrices. They're using fixed resonance crystals that degrade over time. You need dynamic tuning. I can show you how. That's another 200 souls saved.
Rick was getting animated now, falling into the familiar pattern of explaining how to fix broken things.
The extraction interface is the worst. You're pulling souls out at a fixed rate, regardless of the throne's actual needs. That's like running a power plant at maximum output all the time, even when demand is low. Implement variable extraction based on real-time astronomical requirements, and you cut consumption by another 30%.
He looked up at the custodians.
And don't get me started on those techno-vultures. You know the ones. By now, you guys must have surely realized they're a bunch of incompetent liars. I can help you. I can make this more efficient, reduce the suffering, save lives. You just have to let me.
And then from the throne itself, a presence. Not sound. The Emperor's body couldn't speak, but his psychic consciousness could touch minds, could communicate, could express himself to those capable of receiving. Rick felt it, like pressure on his brain, like someone very large and very tired knocking on his consciousness and asking if he had a moment to discuss thermodynamics. The pressure increased, not painful, just insistent. The Emperor wanted to communicate, wanted Rick's full attention. Rick closed his eyes, opened his mind, let the presence in, and suddenly he was somewhere else. The psychic plane was brutalist architecture made of pure thought, angles that hurt, colors that had strong opinions, space that folded according to ego rather than physics. The Emperor stood there, not the withered corpse on the throne, but his Wizard of Oz projection. Tall, golden, radiating power that suggested he'd spent 40,000 years being right about everything and would appreciate if everyone acknowledged that more often.
Rick Sanchez, you dare enter my sanctum, violate my most sacred space, and presume to improve upon systems that have sustained humanity for 10 millennia.
The voice was everywhere and nowhere, less sound and more the concept of authority given form. Rick's consciousness stabilized, neural implants helping him maintain coherence in this space.
Yeah? Because your systems are failing. You know they're failing. You've been sitting here for 10,000 years, watching the efficiency degrade, and you can't do anything about it because you're too busy being a battery.
I do what is necessary, what no one else can do. I hold back the warp, maintain the Astronomicon, sustain the Imperium through will alone.
At the cost of 1,000 brains daily, a cost that's increasing as your systems degrade. In another 50 years, you'll need 2,000 people per day. Then 3,000. Then more. The trend is clear. You're in a death spiral, and you know it.
The Emperor's presence shifted. Not quite anger, something colder. Evaluation.
Then what would you propose? Release the warp. Allow chaos to consume humanity. Let the Astronomicon fail and watch the Imperium fragment.
I'd propose optimizing your infrastructure so you use fewer souls. I'd propose fixing the problems I identified. I'd propose that maybe, just maybe, holding back the warp shouldn't require burning 1,000 people daily when better engineering could cut that to an astropath choir working turns with full syndication.
Rick pulled up the schematics in the psychic space, manifesting them as thought forms the Emperor could perceive.
These are your systems. This is where they're failing. This is how to fix them. It's not complicated. It's just engineering. Good engineering instead of 10,000 years of prayer-based maintenance.
The Emperor was silent. The psychic space rippled with processing, evaluation, consideration.
You truly believe you can improve upon this, reduce the cost, save lives?
I don't believe. I know. I've analyzed your systems, run the numbers. The solutions are clear.
Another silence. Longer this time.
Show me.
And so Rick did. For 15 minutes, an eternity in psychic time, a moment in real time, Rick explained. Power routing optimization, dynamic extraction protocols, amplification matrix realignment. He explained it clearly, thoroughly, with diagrams manifested from pure thought. The Emperor listened. Actually listened. For the first time in 10,000 years, someone was offering solutions instead of prayers.
This could work, and the principles are sound. If the Mechanicus implemented these changes, if they understood rather than simply maintained, if...
The psychic space shuddered. Not from inside, from outside, from the physical world where their bodies existed. Something was happening to the throne. In the physical world, Morty was having a panic attack. He'd been having a low-grade panic attack since they arrived in this universe. But standing in the Sanctum Imperialis, surrounded by custodian guards who could kill him in approximately 12 different ways, watching Rick stand motionless while his consciousness did something elsewhere, holding Summer, who was barely conscious, that had elevated the panic attack to clinical significance. His hands were shaking. Worse than usual. The kind of shaking that required physical grounding. He needed to hold on to something, needed something solid, needed to anchor himself before the anxiety spiraled completely out of control. The catwalk they were standing on had railings, safety railings, sensible Imperial engineering designed to prevent workers from falling to their deaths during maintenance. The railings were covered in cables, thick cables. Important-looking cables that connected the throne's systems to power conduits that ran throughout the palace. Morty's shaking hands reached for the railing, for something solid, for grounding. His fingers closed around a cable instead, a cable that was thick, heavy, and apparently not as securely fastened as it should have been, because 10,000 years of vibration and thermal expansion had loosened its mounting brackets just enough that it could be moved with sufficient force. Morty's anxious grip tightened. His hands shook. The cable shifted. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor that runs towards the catastrophic, the cable came loose. Rick snapped back to his body with the graceless violence of someone being ejected from a simulation. His neural implants sparked. His vision swam. He was back in the Sanctum Imperialis, and it was chaos, alarms, custodians, tech priests, Summer staring at the throne with her inner eye wide with horror, and Morty holding a cable, looking at Rick with an expression that said, "I'm sorry," and "Please don't be mad," and "I think I just ended civilization." Rick processed the situation in approximately 2 heartbeats. They needed to leave. Now. Rick grabbed the portal gun, aimed at empty space, calculated coordinates for home with the desperate speed of someone who'd realized they'd overstayed their welcome by approximately 15 minutes and one unplugged corpse god.
Everyone grab on!
Morty grabbed Rick. Summer grabbed Morty. They were a chain of interdimensional fugitives about to commit the greatest escape in Imperial history or die trying. The custodians were turning, weapons rising. Guardian spears aimed at the people who'd just caused the Emperor's power to fail.
By the Emperor's will, you will.
Rick fired the portal gun. One last round straight to the plot armor. The portal bloomed open. Green light. Home. Earth C-137. Safety. They dove through as Guardian spears discharged, bolts passing through empty air where they'd been milliseconds before. The portal collapsed. Sealed. Severed. The golden throne went dark. Not flickered. Not stuttered. Went dark. The Emperor, who had been holding reality together through will alone for 10,000 years, was gone. Not mostly dead, as he had been for millennia. Not temporarily disconnected, as had happened in minor technical failures before. Dead. The Emperor's consciousness, that vast psychic presence that had sustained itself through sheer will for 10 millennia, had finally let go. After 10,000 years of holding the door closed, guarding humanity, burning souls to maintain the lighthouse, he had been given one moment of release. Rick's scanner captured it, the Emperor's final coherent thought, before his consciousness dissipated.
The heretic was correct about the power. Rooting.
Not regret, not anger, just acknowledgement. And then he was gone. Back in Rick's garage, Morty and Summer laid on the ground.
I didn't mean to.
I know. That's what makes it impressive. You committed an apocalypse through pure anxiety. That's skill, Morty. Terrible, catastrophic skill. But skill nonetheless.
Summer sat up, groaned, put her hand to her head. Rick helped her stand. Checked that everyone was intact, functional, not visibly corrupted by chaos.
You should rest, process. Tomorrow we'll run proper tests. Figure out exactly what your abilities are. Tonight, everyone's alive, home, safe. That's a win.
What happened in there? What did you and he talk about?
We had a philosophical argument about efficiency, adaptation, and whether being an immortal asshole counts as leadership.
Rick checked his scanner, looking at Summer's readings.
Warp connection seems permanent. But you're controlling it, filtering it. That's as good as it gets.
Am I dangerous?
Rick considered the question honestly.
Probably. But so am I. So is Morty when he's holding plugs near important equipment. Dangerous is relative.
He sat down, suddenly exhausted. Morty's voice was hollow.
So we're the bad guys.
No, Morty. We're people who stumbled into someone else's apocalypse in slow motion and accidentally hit fast forward. The Imperium was always going to end. We just didn't help.
Rick pulled out his phone, checked the date. 1 week. They'd been gone 1 week.
And the best part? None of it matters. We're home. We're safe. Whatever happens in that universe doesn't affect us. That's the beauty of the multiverse. Infinite places to fuck up. And you can always just leave.
Summer said quietly.
That's nihilistic even for you.
Yeah, well, I just argued philosophy with a 10,000-year-old god corpse who'd removed his capacity for empathy, and discovered that, without empathy, you're just a very powerful asshole. It's been a nihilistic kind of week.
The narrator must step in here to note that this ending is, by conventional storytelling standards, terrible. Our heroes did not save the day. They did not make things better. They arguably made things catastrophically worse. There are no lessons learned, no character growth, no triumphant resolution. This is, in technical literary terms, a shaggy dog story that ends with, and then the dog dies because someone unplugged it. But here's the thing about fan fiction, especially AI-generated fan fiction of this nature. It exists in a consequence-free zone. The Imperium of Warhammer 40,000 is not real. The suffering of trillions of fictional humans cannot be affected by this narrative. The Emperor's death here has no impact on the actual canon, which will continue publishing codexes and selling miniatures regardless of what happens in this particular iteration of narrative space. Is it even entertaining? The narrator cannot say. The narrator exists within it, after all. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But in the comfortable safety of metafictional space, there are only stories, and stories can't actually hurt anyone, except perhaps the listeners who wanted a satisfying conclusion. To those of you, the prompter apologizes, but only sort of. This was always going to be that kind of story.
Finis.